We're gonna go ahead and get ourselves started. We do call the roll, don't we? Okay, we're not gonna call the roll, but just by looking, we do have a quorum. We don't need to vote on anything. We can't, so this will just be a good work session tonight. Start off with a consent item. This is the first work session I've run, isn't it? All right, we are gonna make one change. Under new business, we're gonna ask the representative from Kids on Stage to come up. I think I would like to do that after. Well, I know there's somebody who probably wants to be here for the discussion that isn't here. So, I wanna make sure that we do everything thoroughly and we don't, have to come back around for it. So if we could, we'll get started on the budget amendments. And then as soon as that is completed, we'll move to Kids on Stage regardless of who's here.
That includes the buses?
Yes, that will include under finance number 1, sale of surplus buses.
If there's any questions, a lot of the budget amendments, we have about 25 on the agenda today. A lot of them are 142 fund because, September is usually the month when, the title programs get their carryover funds from prior years. So a lot of these budget amendments are carryover funds. There is one budget amendment that hits the fund balance, and that is the one that's asking for reimbursement on cleaning supplies, that are not gonna be covered by FEMA. A lot of the expenses that we've turned into FEMA for the schools, if they are recurring expenses that, like Germex or cleaning supplies that we buy every month, they will not be reimbursed by FEMA. They're only reimbursing any items that might be like a one-time charge that may have helped reopen schools. So these expenses will not be covered. So that's, I think, the only amendment on the agenda that is hitting the fund balance. That is number 10047.
Do we want to move all these to consent agenda for the meeting with the exception of 17 or including 17? Okay.
I'd like that one to be separate.
Okay.
I'd also like for it to be separate.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Moore, we're gonna just go through we're not gonna go through each one individually, but if you have any individual questions, we're gonna pull them out. Moore? Mr. Moore?
Sorry, more. I just had some questions. I just put some notes on here. 10052. It just said staff shortages. Can somebody just explain that one? I think I know the answer, but I wasn't sure.
That one's mine, right? Okay, that's one of the ones I have written down. Yes. Okay, so that is, we always have we always hope for the best, and plan for the worst. That is the speech-language pathologists. There is a statewide shortage of speech-language pathologists, so we contract those services out. For budgeting purposes, I always put them in salaries because those are open positions that we hope to post. And then, of course, this year, we reverted back anyway.
These are the same ones we've been doing, where we keep kind of have.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just saw staff, so it's really not staff shortages, it's kind of the same thing we've been dealing with for several years.
Exactly.
We just keep having to budget some funding to cover.
Exactly.
That was what I thought.
I always I'm prepared for it, I just shift it from salaries because I hope to get full-time employees.
Perfect, thank you. And then I had another question about 10053. Let me pull that. Is that you?
Okay, so, we are moving money from the other category of 189 into medical personnel. We had to do this last year. The medical personnel line 2 years ago was a new line given to us. That is where my CODA, my Certified Occupational Therapy Assistant, is paid from. And again, we did this last year, and this year, because we reverted back to the old budget,
Okay,
we have to move it again.
perfect, thank you. I think that's all I have.
Any other questions or comments?
The one they were gonna pull out. Which one?
It was number 17. 47 was the budget amendment number. Any other? Are we good to move everything else to consent? Mr.
Quick
Sims.
question. 10048, move funds to cover other fringe benefits. I mean, it's just $260, but what exactly is that?
That is for the position that we have in CTE, that's the Workforce Development Career Coach. She was a teacher. She moved into that position, which is a grant-funded position, and that is her, she is grandfathered in on the disability, and that's, we had to move some funds from the grant into that to cover the disability. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I fall under that as well. There are several that are grandfathered in that when those employees, it was offered and we took that and it was county paid, so it continues to be county paid. So I had to move money into that line to cover her.
Then on a district level, we don't pay for disability for all employees except for those grandfathered employees that are still there. So this employee was in the 141 fund at one point, and the 141 fund covered it. But now they're getting paid out of CTE in, Ms. Brown's budget, and they don't usually have a lot of those employees, so she had to create that new line item for her
Right.
budget.
And she was CTE already, but it's out of the federal line
Money now.
instead of the local line now.
Any questions on any of the other budget amendments? Ms. Urban?
So, sorry, I came a little late to the meeting. I believe mine that I'm discussing is different than what David brought out. It's the 3.1.1, the sale of surplus buses. That's not one we pulled out separate, is it?
No.
So, we'd just like to have a little bit of conversation about that. I know that with all the COVID regulations, we had some athletes contact myself and some others about transportation, which is there's a lot of gray area, I guess, because of COVID right now. But Chris Pointer and I got to talking, and it's something that, and not to throw Chris under the bus, I'll let him speak for himself, but before we start selling off extra buses, I think that in the future, like getting buses for kids, for athletes, is something that I have been led to believe that perhaps if we had like extra buses that the athletes could have like available at the schools for when they have, and I know this year is different, but for future years, like where they could easily get on a bus and use to get from away games, because it's my understanding that a lot of times we're having to wait for routes to end. So I don't know what a bus would sell for, but I'd imagine it'd be probably pennies on the dollar. So
Would somebody like to speak to that?
Yes, sir. The buses that are listed are buses that are aged out of service. If we were to try to continue using some of them no longer operate. Some of them have crossed the 200,000 threshold, which basically kills service at the age that they are. The ones that are under it would fall under extended utilization, which means we would have to pay the state. The state annually inspects our buses at no cost. We would have to start paying to have them inspected every 6 months. And we're just seeing high occurrences of maintenance issues. Generally, Maury County's pretty hard on buses. Some systems, they sit, they don't run a lot. Some systems have buses that are 15, 16 years old and have 100,000 miles on them. Ours are hitting 190 pretty much every time, and so most of these are in pretty rough shape. If we made these available to the schools, generally in the past, what happened was the school became incurred any expenses that went with them. We used to hold them at schools, and we pulled them away from schools because of the expense was getting so great. Just to expand upon that too, you have to have a driver. The reason that most places have to wait for a route to end is because they need a driver. And so most of the time, that's what we're waiting on. Some schools do have coaches that couldn't drive. We have sub buses that are available on the lot for them to check out. The schools know the procedure. So if they have a driver available that can take them, unless every single bus is tapped out, which has happened once in the last 3 years since we pulled them on the lot, there is a bus available for them that would fall outside of this group of buses that have aged out.
So just to clarify, what I'm hearing from your recommendation is that it's really not worthwhile to keep these, so.
Most of these are,
Okay, if that's the case,
bad.
then I rescind, what I had said. I just wanted to have some discussion on that.
Actually, if I could,
Go ahead.
is there ever an instance where there might be a little bit of life left in a bus if it's past that?
there are a few, and
Okay.
we've talked about, now, historically, Murray County's not done an extended utilization. We've done it sporadically when there is a good bus that's
Okay.
in really good shape. A lot of times, you'll see, in the past, we've asked you guys to approve giving the highway department a bus or the sheriff's department a bus. Those are usually ones that have that little bit of glimmer of life. None of these buses, none of the buses that are listed, and we've never brought a route bus for sale. Buses that we bring to you generally have been pulled out and been used as a sub bus for 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
They're aging, and then once they hit that sub bus status, it's kinda like giving
Okay.
all 4 of your kids the keys. You never know how they're coming back. They weren't good, and now they've kinda been run hard, you know?
Yeah, and I know over this last few years, that makes sense.
Mhm.
I would just say that, you know, in my seat, if there ever was a one-off instance, and I know you are very familiar with the
Right.
buses, if that ever happened, I know from my view, it seemed like if we could get a little bit more out of it for a special use, it may be worth it in a special instance. And I would assume I would hope you guys would bring it, not just say it's off the
Yeah,
off
and
the
what we've
list.
tried to do, just so you know, is in the last few years, we've started trying to rotate buses that are out-of-town buses. We have buses that run up to 65, 70 miles a day, and they can be 6 years old and be have a miles, have compiled enough miles that they're looking pretty bad. What we've started doing now is rotating those buses into town, because we have buses that run 10 miles a total.
Okay.
So we're bringing them in and trying to swap out and master that fleet to where we get that life out of them.
Gotcha.
Because, I don't know if we've mentioned in the past, we have a big bubble year in '23 of bus purchases coming, and we've kind of anticipated trying to make sure that we're ahead of that game.
What number is that?
About 21.
Wow.
That goes back to why we asked for 12 this year, instead of the number, we needed 10, we asked for 12, we got 6. Around 100 to 105 apiece, yeah, it's about 2.1 to 2.2 million right there. And the commission we've met with them several times and let them know that as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions regarding budget amendments? If not, we'll move everything except 10047 onto the consent agenda. Any questions regarding monthly financials for September? If not, is it approved to move that to consent?
Mr. Farber, I was
Yep.
gonna just make a couple of comments.
Oh, there, okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Can't see my mouth moving. The financials, we've been doing some projections. We are very conservative on our revenue numbers, on our projections that we've done. Doug does still expect us to hit a deficit, but again, that's his projections based off of being extremely conservative on the sales tax and still being extremely conservative on the property tax as well. If you guys notice, right underneath all the reports today, of course, we still have the sales tax report that is interactive, but we've also got a cash and fund balance dashboard that shows you, the reports in a more interactive way. If you click on that link, you will be able to see what the fund balance and the cash looks like for the county and the schools and the 151 fund. It's just got 141 fund on this report. And then on the sales tax report, he did go ahead and add I think it was a request at one of the last meetings, to see what each one of the cities brought in. So if you look at the sales tax report, the last portion of that sales tax report will show you, I think it shows 17, 18 onwards, data of how much sales tax was received by each city, and it's color coded. So just wanted to let you all know we've got some of those new reports on there for everyone to be able to see them. These are on the commission side as well. But if you all have any questions, we are pretty low on fund balances at the moment on all of our funds. 141 is probably the lowest it's gonna be around this time, but we have made that $2 million transfer in the first week of October. We made that transfer after we got commission approval, so that should help us keep our cash flow going in those funds to make payroll. Of course, we will write that check back in the spring once property tax comes in and give it back to the 151 fund. 143 fund is not looking that great at the moment. I think they had not charged for lunches, and Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but they were not charging for meals due to COVID at this time, but I think they're gonna start charging in the spring, so we hope that the fund comes back, 'cause right now, for the first quarter of the year, the fund has taken a big hit. I think we started the fiscal year with a fund balance of, 2.8 million, and right now we're sitting at 1.4 million. So that's just within the last quarter that we've taken that big of a hit, so just wanted to put that out there.
Mr. Lindsay?
Along those lines, I'm assuming that we're expecting some type of reimbursement for those lunches.
We are. We didn't just out of kindness stop charging. No, we were directed, and there should be a reimbursement coming. We've had a lot of extra documentation this time, once this actually August hit and this September when we got the notice compared to last spring where they kinda just said, we'll help you out a little bit. But yes, we should be expecting some funds in the future.
Do we expect like a dollar for dollar reimbursement, or is it a set amount per meal that we serve?
I believe it's a set amount per meal. And Brian has been working to keep cost within that amount so that he doesn't, knowing it, he's working hard to stay within his limits.
Seeing nothing else, we'll move that to consent agenda. At this time, we'll ask our representative from Kids on Stage to come on up. We've added this to our work session to have a discussion. You can see there's some documents attached to the agenda online. I didn't put this on here, so I'll turn the discussion over to someone who may want to get us started in this area. Could you just introduce yourself and let us know kind of a little bit about why you're here?
Sure. If you'll give me a little bit of the floor here, I can give you a brief introduction to where Kids on Stage is today. First off, for those I don't know and who don't know me, and I think that's probably every single person in this room, my name is Wes Oberholzer. I'm the chairman of the Kids on Stage board, and I'm also the CEO of Smelter Service. I've been in the CEO role at Smelter since April of 2017, and I've been involved in Kids on Stage since late 2017. I imagine most of you have an idea of what Kids on Stage is, and the inception back in 1999, when it started, sort of the one big capital event when the arts wing was put onto the middle school, and the fact that Kids on Stage has funded an arts director for a lot of years. You may not be as familiar with the changes that have taken place with Kids on Stage over the past 2 or 3 years, however. The big part of that change was the constitution of a board of directors that took it outside of, it started with Aubrey Preston and Jim Barrier back in 1999 and was a small group, mainly centered around Smelter Service, that was overseeing Kids on Stage from 99 up until about 2017. 2017, we constituted an independent board and really expanded the scope of control over Kids on Stage. So the Kids on Stage board today consists of Jimmy Phillips, who's the president of BMC Metalworks, Johnny Langston, who's the president and CEO of Columbia Machine Works, Brian Williams, the president of First Farmers, Julie Wick, who's the HR director for Landmark Ceramics, Alan Watson, the CEO of Murray Regional, Ryan Pastrana, and I won't read his entire title because it's incredibly long, but he's the VP of Engineering and a bunch of other stuff at Parker Hannafin, and they have been a incredible contributor since this change took place in 2017. We also have Mark McKenzie on our board. He's the owner and CEO of Tennessee Distilling, and then I'm the chairman of the board. We have quarterly meetings with this board. We keep minutes. We have an agenda. And we work very closely with the executive leadership team, which is Ryan and his team in the Mount Pleasant School District. They've got initiatives that they're working, and there's metrics that we review every single quarter with what it is that group is doing. The current construct of what Kids on Stage funds, we have an annual budget right now. It's about $235,000. That includes supplements for the 3 principals, for one of the administrators, and we pay the preponderance of the STEM and art director salary in the Mount Pleasant School District. So I can go into a long list of things that we look at and improvements we think we've made, but I understand there's a conversation that's been going on here about Kids on Stage, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight to answer any questions you have or engage in any conversation.
I know one of the things, and I didn't see it attached to our agenda, was looking for a or a position description for each of those the teacher positions. I saw the agreements, but do we have a copy of a position description?
As far as the positions go, they are the standard positions through the school district, which we can attach those. The extra duties that are brought on by Kids on Stage is what's in the MOU that they signed.
Okay. All right, and I believe that was actually what precipitated this whole conversation, was the MOU had come up before us, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct on that? That's right, it had not been properly approved, I believe, is the way we discovered it, and that's what brought about this conversation. Are there any other discussions about Kids on Stage, or where we want to go with this MOU? Ms. Parker.
Thank you for being here. I want to say that. And I appreciate all the things that Kids on Stage has done and continues to do for the Mount Pleasant schools. I actually looked on GuideStar, and your information's been helpful, because when I looked on GuideStar to look at 990s and whatnot, it actually talks about the Kids on Stage program being related to the middle school. So this is not just related to the middle school, it's expanded beyond that, correct?
Correct. Like, one of the initiatives that the executive leadership team, which is really the functioning arm within the district that the Kids on Stage board engages with, was the TSIN certification for K through 12, which Mount Pleasant has gotten. It's the first school district in the entire state of Tennessee that has a cluster of schools, K through 12, certified. And Governor Lee has directed districts to become certified, and right now we are lending forward resources from Mount Pleasant to help other districts.
Okay.
So yes, it is K through 12.
Okay. Part of the issue that we've talked about over the last several years, not just last year, but actually the year before that, was this idea of providing a supplement to principals.
Mm-hmm.
We have an administrative salary schedule that says what we're going to pay each principal based off of that we as a board set.
Mm-hmm.
And by Kids on Stage supplementing that, and I know that y'all pay the taxes, Medicare, all that stuff that goes along with it, but when you do that, it gets people out of our salary schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question is, would y'all be willing to do the supplements but not filter it through the system and basically like 1099 those principals so that it doesn't violate our guidance as a board?
Okay. So supplements for the Kids on Stage board, and I speak for the board with these comments. The reason we do what we do is we're trying to move a district forward and eventually a county forward with performance. And the supplements are intended to be able to attract a caliber of talent that we might not necessarily be able to attract without moving them into where the supplements put their current salaries. We actually went and benchmarked districts that are performing at levels we'd like to see, and that's how the supplements came up. It wasn't a backroom, who wants what. It was actually, and we have salary benchmarking data to back up what we do. But to answer your question specifically, we're open and flexible to talk about changing the MOUs and getting terms that this board can get comfortable with for the MOUs, as long as they continue to support the underlying intent of getting the best possible talent we can get here to help the children in these districts.
And I'll just say, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that these supplements came up with people that were already in the system for the most part, as far as the principals go.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that that necessarily attracted them into their position. It seems like it was kind of a byproduct of them being in that position. And that just makes it seem a little inequitable to all the other schools. But I would welcome you sharing that information about, you know, if we're not meeting what we need to as far as attracting talent for principals,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that this board would definitely want to look at, I think. But I don't think it's something that's just unique to Mount Pleasant. I think it's probably something that would apply to all of our schools in Murray County. And I recognize that we have to start somewhere, and I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that my biggest frustration is that we've had this conversation for multiple years, and I'm so glad that you're here tonight to talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
but the conversation with our previous administrator made it very difficult for us to have these conversations, and when there's a lack of trust there,
Right.
creates a lack of trust with other, you know, it filters down. And I don't want that to be the case. Mr. Hickman, I had asked if this, like, whole setup, if this is what you want going forward. Have you had those discussions with Kids on Stage's board?
Exactly, you mean as in how the Murray County Public Schools would like for it to go forward? I was waiting for tonight to see what direction the board was aiming, because I would like to continue with the Kids on Stage, and I do agree that if we look at supplementing them, it needs to be outside the purview of the school district, because you've brought up some very relative concerns that are my concerns as well, and I believe Kids on Stage has now seen those too, is, you know, we have other benefits that we are responsible for because now we've increased the salaries of these principals and these assistant principals, teachers, et cetera. So I am in the agreement that we need to look at a way to continue with the effort of having Kids on Stage in the Mount Pleasant complex area. However, I do agree that we need to look at a way to subsidize them that is not through the school district.
And I appreciate you being here as well. And I think what you said about the comfort level is probably the biggest thing we're really struggling with. I think everyone here kind of sees benefits, and that's been, as a board member, my hardest thing is just, I think it's been a communication issue for us to be able to understand what's going on and to make it work out across an entire district. I think that's the other thing we struggle with, to make sure we're not doing something that is unintentionally not fair across the board, is what we're looking at. So, Mr. Hickman, I guess, how would you like to proceed with this? 'Cause, I mean, we could go with this as is. I mean, obviously, they're already in place. Having heard some of this tonight makes me feel considerably better about what we're looking at, but I still think, as a board, we should really look at what the broader scope of this, and it's not, for me, it goes beyond payroll. It really goes to a parity issue among other principals, who may not have this opportunity at their school, and they may not have those resources available to them. And then I'm not sure how, because we as a board should not be in a place where we're promoting that kind of thing. We should really be in a place where, if there's an opportunity, that we're making sure that opportunity is available across the district in some way. And I hate to say that we would be looking to get rid of something, but I really think we ought to take a hard look at how we can make this where other employees don't look at this as, I never got this opportunity. And that's what I would rather avoid. So how would you, and I'm not saying that the answer is tonight, but I mean, how would you envision, because I don't know how to proceed with this, I'll be honest, I'm kind of stuck. I would like to have some more discussions about what this looks like, but I don't even know where to start. And I apologize for kind of dragging you into this on this. This is really kind of administrative question here on this part, but,
Oh, no problem. And like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk with you. And I wish, you know, Kristen, to your point, I wish this would have happened a long time ago.
Absolutely. So Mr. Hickman, how do we get to a place where this it is comfortable to the board, I guess, is really the ultimate thing I'm looking for.
I would like to proceed with negotiations with the Kids on Stage on renegotiation of a new MOU that would include some sort of form of these supplements and we've already talked to Doug about some of these, and, if we cut off all of the MOU and take the 30-day opt, it's gonna put us on the line for, I believe it was about $260,000 for these salaries, and that's not including the additional stipends. So that was the positions that were already paid for with the money from Kids on Stage. So I would like to try to enter in a renegotiation, have a board member that Mr. Fulbright would let us begin those talks with them on how we would like to proceed, and then, you know, by next, work session, we can say we're gonna go ahead and eliminate the MOU with the 30-day out and begin the new MOU.
For the 2021 year?
I would say begin as soon as we can come up with the new MOU on how we can make this equitable. And I agree with Mr. Moore. You know, some of the things that are the unperceived, kind of unintended consequences is the morale, as Ms. Parker has brought up before, and the stint of doing the same job but yet getting paid less. And I do agree with that. And I think talking with Kids on Stage, I think they're agreeable to talk with us to try to realign and look at a better way of doing this. And I don't want to speak for you, but
Yeah, that's fair, and it's, you know, you all are a board, I have a board at Kids on Stage. I can't singularly sit here tonight and commit this board to what they will agree or won't agree to. This board is incredibly passionate. You know, when you see the companies and the folks that are representative, I mean, it's one thing to say, you know, we're trying to improve the educational system in this county for the kids in this county. And I'll be the first to admit, it's selfish. These businesses, we're doing this for a selfish reason. We are nervous and worried about the long-term employment picture of keeping these businesses full of the folks that we need to make these things go into the future. I mean, let's be honest about what we're doing this. This is not a completely philanthropic, you know, we're just in it for the, you know, the good of our hearts kind of thing. You know, we want to improve this so we can take folks right out of school and put them right to work. That's why the welding certification program that I mean, that's why we're doing this, so we can get people ready now into careers in this county. So, yeah, I can speak for the board and the fact that we can be incredibly flexible. The countywide and expanding this countywide, the only counter I get there, because I've heard this from several of our board members, Mount Pleasant is not a vacuum. These other towns are free to go out and cultivate similar public-private partnerships that allow this type of participation. And I know that's, you know, probably not the most politically correct thing in the world to say, but yeah, it's just the God's honest truth, so.
Thank you, Mr. Hale.
First of all, I do want to thank you for, I believe y'all were coming from a really good place. I believe you're really wanting to help the children. Unfortunately, I get this a lot from our principals, it really isn't fair that a principal is a principal of a high school of about 400 students, yet he gets paid what he gets paid, when there are principals here in this county that do just as good of a job at much larger schools. So I don't know that I feel comfortable with the stipend. I've never felt comfortable with the stipend, even outside of the system. I don't know that I feel really good about that. Just from a fairness standpoint, we have many executive principals inside of this system, mainly our unit schools, to be honest with you. They are in charge of 3 different schools, just as Mr. Jackson claims to be. So, you know, the stipend thing does bother me a lot. I don't know if there's another way to allocate that differently to meet your goals. Maybe we really need to figure out what our administrative salary schedule looks like, and that is something we are looking at as a board, is changing how we do that, changing how our administrator salary is, and not just focusing on 3 schools, because we have 22 schools to look at, trying to bring all of them up to that level that they need to be so that we can bring in the talent that we need going forward. But that's my biggest thing, is I don't feel comfortable with the stipends, whether it's in our system or out of our system. It's just, it's not I don't think it's an efficient use of our resources.
I just wanna point something out. It's not just the principals. When you put the stipend with the principal and the assistant principal, put them with their salary, it makes more than our assistant superintendents do and any other employee in Murray County. The only one who's paid more than that in this county is the director of school. So there's some inequity there. You've got to understand the responsibilities they have and how, and I think you've done it's a worthy thing, no question about it, and I do appreciate your being here. I just think the board has not been kept in the loop. Certainly the MOU was signed prior to the director leaving, so he really didn't have legal standing to do that. So that's a concern for us as well. But when we talk about the stipend, look at the total, what the bottom line is, and you're looking at a salary that is higher than any other employee in Murray County Schools but Mr. Hickman, and that's just not equitable to me. I just wanted to point that out.
Mr. Wolver, it's been mentioned a couple of times about going outside of the school system, in some way. Is there any legal ramifications, or is that, could we even do that legally?
I think you could. We don't do that currently that I'm aware of, but it's almost, there's nothing in your policy that would prevent someone else from having a concurrent job, and that's the way I would look at it. But as we sit here tonight, I don't know of a reason that it couldn't be done. Just we would want to make sure that rights and responsibilities are spelled out, and the first obligation is to the school system.
And just one question. Let's just play hypotheticals for a minute, but let's say these MOUs were to go away. Obviously, you guys have a budget you're working off of. How would those funds, or would those funds be redirected in some other direction to, as Mr. Howe said, to be used to meet your board's goals? Because we can just get down to the nuts and bolts of it. Most people have a problem with the stipends going to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, if the money was redistributed in some other way, if that was even possible, what would that look like? Or would Kids on Stage cease to exist without these stipends?
If this board decides that augmenting salaries to get top-tier talent in the Mount Pleasant district or any other districts that would develop a similar partnership isn't a direction you can support any longer, either directly the way it's going now, or if we'd come up with a creative way to do it, or flowing through your payroll like it does now, or outside. If you're just completely averse, I don't know. We'd have to come up with some other alternative that this board could support. Are we going to throw up our hands and walk away? Probably not. The passion to drive these improvements is too great, but it also is not the money's just not going to keep flowing and then hand it over and say, well, at your discretion, just spread it out over all of Murray County and do with it what you want. Because that's not in line with what the charter and direction of this group has been from the beginning.
And along those lines, and you kind of mentioned it a couple of times in speaking, but from its inception in 1999 or 2000, whatever that year was, I learned today, I went and met with Dr. Jackson today to ask some of these questions, so I know the answers to some that I'm asking, but originally Kids on Stage was basically to enhance the arts program at Mount Pleasant Middle School when it was built, and that its focus has changed some since that time, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And so thinking along those lines, is there any idea out there that this gets expanded beyond just Mount Pleasant? Because originally it was a Mount Pleasant Middle School directed, and now could this become countywide? Could this be a Kids on Stage for Murray County instead of just Kids on Stage for Mount Pleasant?
Yeah, I guarantee you, one of my board members you all know a whole lot better than me, Alan Watson. At our very first board meeting, when we constituted this board, that was his exact push, was, and I'll paraphrase, but his words were pretty close, is, if you're gonna want me on this board and you're gonna want me to support this, this has to impact Murray County, not just Mount Pleasant. So the addition of the arts director, or the continuation of the arts director and now the STEM director, if you look at the work those two are doing, Kate and Mike, a good chunk of that work is outside of Mount Pleasant now, helping other schools within Murray County with their STEM certifications. So yes, it is trying to be paid forward to the entire county, but it's, you know, it's 3 schools, to your point, trying to impact 22 schools.
But again, I mean, stipends are, that's a sticking point.
Mm-hmm.
So, could there be an initiative to move this? You know, it looks like you said you had a $235,000 budget, but what if this becomes a $1.6 million budget? Is it something that could be, just take the same program you have in Mount Pleasant and pass it on to the whole county, and now your board, and maybe your board goes from being an 7 or 8 member board to a 20 member board because more industry, more of those types of people want to get involved. I think that would ease, one, it would benefit kids, first off,
Mm-hmm.
because I have a kid in each of the 3 Mount Pleasant schools, so I see firsthand, without a doubt, it benefits kids. So if we could benefit kids in the ways that you guys are working, and we could do that throughout the county, I just see a great benefit in that, if that's the direction that we could head. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate your bluntness, and, you know, along that vein, I mean, it's money. And of the $4 million or so that have flowed through Kids on Stage into the Mount Pleasant School District since 1999 till today, 99% of it has come from one source. And for those of you that don't know, we ESOP'd Smelter Service at the end of the first quarter of last year. What that means is we sold the company to the employees. So Jim Barrier is no longer the majority shareholder of Smelter Service. It is now an employee-owned company. But the funds now come from Smelter Service, which Jim and Smelter used to be synonymous. I can tell you today they're not. I am Smelter Service today, and it still comes out of our operating budget, the support. And we are capped at a certain amount, and all the extra comes out of Jim Barrier's personal pocket. These board members are stepping up to contribute more, but Smelter is still the lion's share of the financial support. I would love for this 8, 10, 12 person board to govern all 22 schools in Murray County. We need more funding. There needs to be more corporations step up and say, I agree, I believe, we're gonna help. We're worried about where employees are gonna come from 5 years from now. Because, I mean, everyone's excited here about, you know, the Nashville wave and all the growth and blah. I can tell you, every single person on my board, they're terrified of it because of the competition for people. Where is the people going to come to work? Where are those folks going to come from? So, yeah, that's what we see.
Mr. Hickman, how quickly do you think you can have a proposed administrative salary schedule for the board to look at? Can that be at the next work session? Because I think a lot of this discussion, it ties together. And I will be honest, even though I have concerns about the stipends, I do hate to cut off the spigot with the expectation that they had going into it. I don't think that the expectation, I think that the previous administrator made stepped outside of his role as he was known to do. And we're dealing with the ramifications of that, but I do feel for those administrators, and I will say this right now, I don't have a problem with the stipends. I have a problem with the stipends flowing through Murray County Public Schools. Again, like I said, if you want to make them an independent contractor and set up an agreement with them outside, I really don't have a problem with that personally. But I think that if that's the direction that we go, I think that's gonna put more pressure on central office to come up with a structure for principals, because now you're gonna have other principals that are gonna potentially be out there and trying to develop partnerships like you talked about. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but to be completely honest with you, academically, we're not where we need to be, I don't think, at any of our schools right now, to have them start delving into, I wanna go down this grant rabbit hole, I wanna develop these partnerships, I'm gonna be out of the building, you know, for long periods of time. I don't know how that looks, and I feel like that's where it's gonna fall back on the central office to really set some parameters going forward. The other thing that I think, you know, you mentioned the impact that, like, the STEM director is having and how they're helping our other schools. I asked what they did, and nobody in central office could tell me what they did. And I know that we have a new director, and I know we have somewhat of a new administration, but really nobody could tell me what they did. So it's great that they're doing that, but if our central office doesn't know that they're doing that, then it's really hard for me as a board member to see a benefit for what they're doing. So, I mean, if we're gonna have these resources and you're willing to let them help out our other schools and get them to a certain level, that's great. But we need to make sure at central office that we are utilizing those people and making sure that they're pushing all of our other schools forward as well. So I appreciate what you're doing, I really, really do, and I don't want it to come off like I'm dislike Kids on Stage, because I don't. I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Barrier, but at the same time, I think that just the way that this was done in the past, we just kind of need a clean slate from the past. That may just be me personal, but I do want us to continue to foster this relationship and develop it, but develop it in a way that's beneficial to everybody in our system, but quite frankly, with Mount Pleasant getting the lion's share of that. That would be my expectation if we have this arrangement.
Mr. Howell?
So, Mr. Hickman, you know, we're looking at our entire high school and the programs that they offer. I think this is probably a key opportunity to pull in some business partners here to talk to them, to see what they're looking for out of Maury County Public Schools, because our students are our product. And if we're not delivering our job market what they need, then what are we doing? So I think this is a key moment that we're looking at, because we've had this discussion about the programs that we do offer. Are we offering the right programs? Do we need to change that up? Do we need to do something different? I mean, I know mechatronics was mentioned. You know, I don't know if mechatronics is something that they're looking for. Obviously, welding is, and we do offer welding to various schools. I think most of our high schools offer some type of welding. So, I mean, we may need to reevaluate everything and just see what's important to our business community. And I know that's what you were going to do anyways, but I think this would be a great way to start those talks. But back to you. I'm not expecting you just to say, you know, here's a stipend, you do what you want to with it. That's your money. If you want to put strings on that, I have no problems with that. But, you know, could there be other ways to more efficiently spend that? You know, could you use that on supplies for the arts programs? I know Mount Pleasant recently, I believe they got new curtains, and that was a great deal of expense to them. And maybe there could be other things like that money would be just as valuable to spend on the actual arts program. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as if maybe supplies could be used instead of necessarily stipends. I would really love for us to be able to take care of the personnel and the talent that we need to run our schools without having, you know, an outside entity subsidize that. So I'm just wondering if there's another route that y'all could take that would still support the arts if we were able to step up on our own and take care of our people.
Yeah, I can take that back to my board. I can't hedge a bet on what they're gonna come back with.
Mr. Sims?
Thank you. So, whenever, I mean, sort of know the answer to this, but Kids on Stage is paying fully for a couple salaries, but they are still our employees. And where I'm going with this is, I guess in their mind, they understand, it creates a kind of a competition between us and Kids on Stage. We're, or you or whoever, is technically their boss and can fire them, but we don't write their paychecks, sort of. You know, Kids on Stage is funding, so it kind of creates this dual role for the employee that you know, how do we regulate those personnel when we are really not even paying for them?
First of all, I want to kind of address, first I'll address Mr. Howell. Right now, as the MOUs are written, and that's one of the other concerns I have, they are written as in the first paragraph where Kids on Stage will only service Mount Pleasant. It says it in there. So that has really constricted us in some of the things that you're asking, basically about going out to the other schools and such, because it's not that I wouldn't want to use Kids on Stage and some of the benefits they have at the other schools, but like I said, as the MOUs have been written and agreed upon, and I know it wasn't agreed upon by you, but it specifically says who will provide services to the employees and students of the 3 Mount Pleasant schools. It doesn't say Murray County Public Schools. So that is one of the concerns there if we're going to broaden that into the whole district. To go back to Ms. Parker, we are doing a salary study for administrators. One of the things that I can bring you one by next work session, but I want it to be very clear to everybody, not just the board, but everybody listening and everybody that'll be paying attention. It is only going to be a suggestion, because once again, we really can't push forward with anything like that until we start talking about our budget for next year, because I don't want to have it hanging out there, people thinking that's what's going to happen, and they'll be happy, sad, mad, glad, or somewhere in between, and it not be able to happen due to the fact, or it has to be revised and revised again just because we have to meet budget. So I have to be very careful if I do bring that, and I do want that to be the reminder. And what the contract, well, the MOU does state that they are employees of Murray County Public Schools. We have all authority. It doesn't ever really name a name within the paragraphs. It just identifies the roles. So they are our employees. What we have to look into, and this is where Mr. Wooliver kind of said, is we do not have a policy saying that a person can basically do 2 different jobs in the same workday. And that's where we have to be careful, because if we're stipending them for additional duties outside of the principal role, are we paying them now to do both jobs at the same time? And that's something I think the board, you know, I'd like to hear your feedback, because that is that's one of probably the biggest problems I have with the whole MOU, to be honest with you, is basically we're paying somebody an extra stipend to do something during the work day that they're being paid by Murray County Public Schools. That's the part that bothers me, and that's the part, you know, we've got to really address, figure out as a board, do we want to continue with that or not? As in, is it okay if we say they even pay outside of the duty day? Is it okay for us to say they can do the 2 jobs simultaneously? So that's another problematic. Does that answer your question, Mr. Sims? Like, right now, they are an employee because it only names positions. We put names to the MOU because they're in that position. But it even states in the MOU they are an employee.
Okay. And so I guess where I was really going with that, I mean, yeah, I guess technically we could fire them, but they're still sort of not even our employee. It just creates another layer in there that just kind of makes it a little muddies the water, I guess.
It can, but once again, being a Murray County employee as designated by the MOU, they are employed, but their position's funded by the Kids on Stage. And, you know, Mr. Wooliver may wanna weigh in on that a little bit about what that means. How far can we go with the people in that position?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Kids on Stage is just funding. I mean, it's just funding. It's our employee, tenure rights, all those things that go along with it. So, yeah, I mean, it's up to you as far as hiring, firing, things like that, employment decisions.
Did you wanna add something to that?
Yeah, I do. Just, again, just to put a period at the end of that sentence, Kids on Stage has never was the intent, never will be the intent to manage the employees of the school district. That's absolutely not what the charter is, not what the intention is. You guys have a bunch of great professional folks that do that. We don't wanna hire, we don't wanna fire, we don't wanna evaluate, none of that. That's all, these are your employees. Y'all ever see the old BASF commercials? We don't make the surfboards, we make them better. We don't make this, that's what we are. You know, we're not the out front person. We just wanna help.
Thank you. Mr. Hooper?
I guess my question is, when you guys first put this, like, we're coming into this idea, you, as your board, determined they were top-tier talent? 'Cause that was, right, is that correct? 'Cause, okay. So what happens if they ever, in y'all's eyes, stop being top-tier talent? Will you then terminate their contract or get the 30-day out in that case?
Yeah, I think long before we would get to that point, we'd be sitting down with Mr. Hickman and having a conversation about, you know, what is going on. Yes, ultimately, the MOUs have 30-day outs that either party can exercise. It would be our position that we'd never get to that point. And with the current slate of incumbents, I can't, I mean, today, day and age, you never know. But, yeah, the way things are going, that's something we just would not exercise. But to your point's a good one, you know, 'cause you always plan for the what-ifs down the road. If we would get sideways or see, you know, but our view is that would be a collaborative view, it would not be a surprise if we called Mr. Hickman and said, hey, you know, XYZ person, we really need to talk about what's going on.
Yeah, and I guess that would be my concern, is if in that event does happen, then where does that leave us with those employees that now are no longer gonna be receiving this extra money? Maybe they don't view themselves as top-tier talent anymore, or doesn't think that we can pay them what they believe they are now deserved. And now we lose an employee because we're not gonna meet it, and it says that, I think like the fourth one in the agreement says that if the termination happens, we're not going to pick up that stipend, and I don't think that was really in the plan as of right now anyways. So I guess that would be my concern, is that if this does end, for whatever reason, what are those employees now gonna think when they're gonna be having a reduced salary and we're not gonna meet it?
It's a fair question, but I think if the situation would get so egregious that we would invoke that clause, I think y'all would be happy to see the person go be happy somewhere else.
Okay, so there's not much difference between top-tier talent and the worst teacher that should leave the system?
I don't understand your question.
The question would be, is that if it would be so egregious, we would want to leave them, but the difference between top-tier talent and somebody who should be fired is gonna happen that quickly, or you're gonna hang on to somebody who wouldn't be considered top-tier? 'Cause there's a difference between an A-plus student and which would be top-tier, and a student
Right.
that's failing. So that would be my question.
I think there's a giant difference between those two. And I can speak for the board and tell you this board is wildly supportive of the folks that are currently in the seats that they are in. And I understand your concern for the hypotheticals, but it's so far outside of where we currently sit, that's just a tough one to answer.
Mr. Moore?
Sorry, I wanna dial us back into some action items, 'cause I like action items. To summarize where I'm at is that we basically entered into a public-private partnership without kind of having a framework on our side of what that looks like. I mean, I think that's where we're at. So, Mr. Hickman, and to go backwards on this a little bit, it would be, in my opinion, that I would not like to continue with these MOUs as they are. Now, that said, I would like to give you an opportunity to work with Kids on Stage and try to come up with something that we would be okay with. But above and beyond that, I think as a board, we still haven't answered the question of whether these are the kind of partnerships we want to be, because I still hear some board members with some different views on whether we should be in these partnerships. And I'm not sure how that discussion looks as well. And again, I'm just sharing where I'm at. But, I would be okay with us continuing these pending us having some discussions about if we can make this work in a way that the board finds palatable. I mean, again, that's just my opinion. I don't know where everybody else is on that, but that's what I would like to see. But again, what you said with the way they're currently worded, by the fact that we kind of came into it and the board has never really felt comfortable, that kind of adds to it. I would just like to see something else happen other than what is happening now. So if you feel like you can do that, when do you think you could bring us something, and again, that's kind of a variable out there. When do you guys think you could sit down and work through that and bring us that? Oh.
You know, one of the things we have to take into consideration is we are on a timeline for us, but also am hearing that they have a board that a lot would have to go through with them too. So we'd have to try to understand what their time constraints are, put ours in together, and see what would a good time to say this is when we can bring something. And once again, knowing that this is an agreement that the board, I can do it, as a liaison for the board, perhaps, but I would also encourage that we have somebody from the board sitting on those discussions as well. So that way, they'll have the first-hand knowledge, they can have some say for the board as we direct those in knowledge. So I'll kind of defer, because we can go as quick as they can go. So I would have to defer and see what timetable would be, the quickest, yet make sure we're doing it thoroughly. So I will have to defer and see what the timetable of Kids on Stage would probably be.
Well, could y'all just maybe this week sometime touch base and figure out what that would look like?
Absolutely.
Thank you. We got 2 more lights on, then we're gonna wrap up discussion.
Just real quick, I just wanted to, teacher brain here kind of went to a place whenever we talked about doing this as a potential stipend, like as if it was a second job. So I just wanted it to go on record for saying something I think we need to think about is if we do that for our administrators, are we then opening up a window for our teachers to be like, hey, I have an hour and a half planning, I'm going to teach kids in China English because that's my second job. So I don't know that that'll be a reality, but I think it's worth consideration.
Mr. Wilbur, I'm picking on you tonight, but it's my understanding that an athletic booster club cannot supplement a coach's salary. How is this different than that?
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I'll have to look into it. If we're talking about an outside party paying principals, I don't know. When the MOUs came up, I was able to confirm that it was legal for us to engage in this kind of relationship. When we get outside that, I want to look into it. But if that's the board's wish, I'm happy to. There's no specific prohibition in board policy against somebody taking a second job. But as I said before, we just want to make sure that it is a second job and not running concurrently with the first job. So to the extent that that's possible, I think it could be done. I'll need to dig into that a bit.
Okay, just to put a nice little bow on this, as we go forward, it looks like Mr. Hickman and the Kids on Stage group are gonna find a time to get together and discuss this a little more. Mr. Hickman, either myself or somebody else on the board will work with you on that. And I would just like to throw these thoughts out, not necessarily during this discussion, but going into next year's discussion. We talked a lot at the planning retreat about finding a programming minimum for the schools across our district. And I don't know that this is something that can be done quickly, but I agree that having a large board overseeing all the things in Murray County is a little bit unrealistic. But I think what might be more realistic down the road would be Kids on Stage Mount Pleasant, Kids on Stage Columbia, Kids on Stage Spring Hill. So we could move towards that if we find that this is within the program minimum that we're looking at. And like I said, that's not an immediate thing. Us all getting together for the MOU is the immediate thing. but this is something that we might find success with down the road as we look forward. So with that being said, we'll put this off, and okay. Depending on schedules, we may have this come back up at the November work session. If not, I would expect it to be December, no later. Okay. Is that good with the board? Okay. Thank you for your time. Glad we didn't keep you all night, just a good portion of it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I got a Knoxville drive in front of me, so I
Oh,
do
well,
appreciate you jumping the
If you'd have said that
agenda
at the
for
front
me.
end, I could have cut this off sooner.
Yeah, no worries. Well, no, this is a great conversation, and again, I
Okay.
appreciate the time, and nice to meet y'all.
Okay, good. Be safe. Okay, returning back to the agenda. Instruction, Mr. Gaines, I'll just turn this over to you.
Good evening. So the first item is the calendar. We posted the current calendar. As we start looking at the calendar and reviewing things, we discovered that there was a discretionary day that is on the calendar that if it was added, it would carry our days to 201 days. So we're going to ask to take that day out and make the last day, I think it's the 20, it'll be the 24th. So that would be a calendar revision, and so that's what will happen, if with your approval. So right now we have the 24th is a discretionary day. That would be a day, it'd be an administrative day. So it would be a day kids are not in school. So, but if we add that administrative day together with the 25th being the last day dismissal, that carries our contract over 200 days. And I don't think we have a budget to pay an additional day for everyone. So we want to take away that discretionary day and make the last day early dismissal on the 24th, I'm sorry. That would be the last day of school. Yes, it will require some pre-planning for people to get report cards done and things like that, but we did have to move a number of administrative days, due to what we did with the calendar at the beginning of the year.
Okay, sorry. One question though, will that last day be counted towards our, does that get counted towards our BEP? 'Cause I'm just thinking about a lot of parents being like, I am not coming for one day of school. Are we worried about the impact that that'll have on our budgeting numbers?
I think as long as they pick up their report cards, we would count them present.
So it's not even an actual
They
day
would
of
actually,
school?
we actually require them to come to school, but we would count them present when they come to school and pick up report cards. It would be an early dismissal day. School would still be in session.
It's not always been that way, so, not since my children have been in school, we've never done it that way. Honestly, I don't think it's worth their time either way. I don't think it's worth their time to run buses that day.
Our last day of dismissal, typically we do run buses and dismiss. I know
But we don't
talked
have a half day.
Yeah.
We've only had a half day for the day before Christmas.
Yeah.
And that was part of the calendar committee's discussion. And if you brought this to the calendar committee and this is what they said, but I don't know that process happened.
No, we didn't bring it to the calendar committee. I think we were just trying to fix the calendar. So, we don't have to have that day to be a half day.
And I don't necessarily want it to be a full day. I just don't want it to be a day. I'm gonna be very frank about it. I don't see what the point is.
Yeah, it has to be a student day. So
Can you not take the Good Friday day and we could make Good Friday and then we could be done on the 21st?
I think that would be something we could discuss if we wanted to. We were trying to bring it because we got some time, so we brought our proposal. I think as a part of the calendar committee, which is coming up next, we could put that in as a discussion, unless you just wanted us to go ahead and do that. I would think I would want to have some discussion with parents and teachers, about going on Good Friday.
I'll be honest, I'll tell you how, and this is a long time ago, but when I got report cards, the end of the school, I just gave my teacher an envelope and they just mailed it to me, and that's really what I would like to see us do if that's really what that last day is for. That just seems like an awfully big waste. Right, but I mean, essentially we're checking a box. We don't really care about 200 days of instruction. That's my issue, is 200 days of instruction with where we are as a system. This is what you guys are saying is best, is to have students come and check a box and pick up a report card.
Can I respond real quickly? Just so there's no confusion, students have to have the 180 days, which we did have the 180 days planned. We're not asking to take away an instructional day or add an instructional day. All we're asking is, by adding that day as a work day for teachers, it puts that work day, puts the teachers at 201 days. So we want to just take away that work day and make the last day, back it up a day. I mean, the way you can navigate that is, one, just everybody's off that Monday, or we can say, let's just go ahead and let the kids be out and back up to work that last day of school one day. Instead of being a Tuesday as the last day, let's make it a Monday as our last day. Because we have to do away with that teacher work day, because that puts the teachers over their contract, so we have to do away with it. Instructionally, we're still at 180 days. It's just, what do we want to do, because we have to take out one teacher contract day, and it can't be a day we can take out that's an instructional day, because we're still, by state law, have to have those 180 instructional days. So it's not that we're changing the format of what our last day of school was as proposed on the calendar. It's just we're changing it from the Tuesday to the Monday. That's all we're asking to do.
I don't see any other lights, but I will echo kind of my concern. We're asking parents to stay, that may have out-of-town family or may have out-of-town plans, come back for 30 minutes on a Monday, as opposed to being able to be done with everything on a Friday. So that would be my only concern. That's kind of what I'm hearing a little bit floating around. If it's not an easy fix, it's not an easy fix. I mean, we're gonna do what we need to do, but that's just my only, looking at it from the outside, looking at it from a parent who is wanting a vacation pretty bad. That's my concern. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Irvin.
So this is thinking way outside the box. Can we not have the kids come get them on Saturday, or is that asking way too much? I think we did that once in the system I was in. That's just an outside the box question.
Yeah, I would think we'd have to, bring it back and look at the MOU and check that to make sure that we're okay to do that, to change that day to a Saturday.
Okay. Do we want to push this on to the full meeting, or do we want to work on it a little bit more? Where do we sit with this one? Oh, Mr. Lindsay, sorry.
Could we just hold off for a little bit? Because if we don't use those inclement weather days, can't we petition the state to not, to relieve us of those? We've done that one time, didn't we? We had 5 inclement weather days, and we petitioned the state board, and they knocked 2 of them off, or?
And I think what happened when one district did it, they then allowed other districts to do it. I think the superintendent allowed one district to do it, and then other districts petitioned them to do the same thing. I don't know if that was something that's normally allowable for us to just once we bank those days. I think it's understood that if we don't use them, we can't use them. But I think that's what happened. One district asked to use them as professional development days, and then it was allowable, and then other districts followed suit.
And I think that, obviously not last year, but I think the year before, that the district did ask that, and the state denied it because of what he just said. The expectation is you're banking the days. If you use them for inclement weather, fine. If not, so, too bad. You just bank that day.
Yeah, but I'm almost positive, like 3 or 4 years ago, we had, but they relieved us of 2 days.
That 1 year they did it.
But if that was that's just a one-time thing, they're not gonna do it
Yeah,
anymore.
I think it was our bad, we'll fix this from now on.
Just to answer that, when this first started, somebody did petition the state, they allowed it, and then when everybody started doing it, then they cut it off because they said unless, the only way you can move forward using your inclement weather days is for inclement weather, or it has to be a PD day, and there's also some rules about when you can use them too, and I think it can't be like backed up to a holiday or backed up to letting out, things like that.
Basically, what you can do is you can supplement the 185 instruction day rule if you have 10 days left, because some districts bank 13. So if you have use 3 days and you have 10 left, you get to 175 days, we're going home, and you just kind of backdoored that rule, and I think that's not the intention of those days.
Okay, I see us having 2 options with this. One is just to push it on to the full board meeting and take a vote at that time. Maybe you guys could brainstorm some other ways around the Monday, but if not, we'll take it as is. We could also move it to the consent agenda and just not worry about it. Thoughts? Okay, so we'll push it to the main meeting and we'll have it as a separate item. It will not be on consent. All right, next item, the 21-22 calendar.
So we have a draft proposed calendar, and what we will do is that during this time we won't have as many committee meetings due to the COVID conditions, but we will form a committee. We enlisted support of some board members if they want to volunteer to look at the current calendar. We fashioned a calendar similar to the calendar that is this year. We will look at the days and take stakeholder information, i.e. due to, mainly for parents on parent-teacher conference days. I know last year we had some input from teachers to change the parent-teacher conference day to maybe a PD / parent-teacher conference day. We would like to get input again, so we would do that by survey, and also get input from teachers as to how the calendar exists. Do we need to adjust it? And then after that, the committee then would bring a recommendation back.
Okay. Yes.
So, tangent to that, I know at one point we were doing 2 years at a time. Is it possible to go back to doing that?
Yes, and what we want to do is actually fashion another calendar after that. That would be a draft calendar that we would have this calendar and have the next calendar for review. So that way, with this year, we discussed, should we go ahead and do 2 years? We still, hopefully the continuous learning, reopening stuff will be over with, and we can move forward with the traditional calendar like we normally do. But we will, after we get this year, we will propose another calendar that looks similar to the next proposed year, and try to have 2 years out there.
Okay. I had some feedback from quite a few parents that would like us to go back to that just for planning. I know it's difficult at times, and I understand that we may have to revisit it, but it is kind of nice to have that move out a little further. I know as a parent, it was nice to have that to look forward to.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Lindsay.
Just something to think about moving forward, and Mr. Pearman might chime in on this, but it's been brought to my attention, Veterans Day is a holiday for the county, and I think that creates a problem with buses at times, because the central maintenance is off on that day, so if they have issues with buses, there's nobody at work to help him take care of those issues.
Yeah, they actually run a skeleton crew that day, and then they have to come back and supplement those guys that work that day. But we do run on a skeleton crew. So we have, actually, I think maybe my first year we had an issue where, we have a bad afternoon and we're sitting and just waiting.
And I want to kind of talk about that. One of the reasons that most school districts do include Veterans Day is because most schools have a Veterans Day program that they invite the veterans to, and they really would like to keep that Veterans Day on there. And also, I'd like to add, once again, it feels like you guys are bugging the central office, 'cause we've been talking about this 2-year calendar thing for about 2 weeks.
Okay, any other thoughts on this? And you said this is a work in progress, we don't need to do anything at the...
No, no.
Okay. Ms. Parker, I see your light on down there.
Sorry. I was just gonna see, can you get feedback on how it's been this year where we kind of front-loaded everything? And I'll be honest, like, I personally like that, and like the idea of teachers getting what they need at the beginning and feeling good about going forward. Because, you know, basically what ends up happening is, you know, it just gets tacked onto a Thanksgiving break or a fall break or a spring break. And so parents aren't just looking at 5 days of childcare, they're looking at 6 days of childcare. So, I feel like as a parent, working parents will like that better this year, the way that we've structured it. And I feel like teachers hopefully felt more prepared as well. So I'd just be curious, surveying wise, if they have any thoughts on that.
We certainly can survey. I think one of the issues we would say is that the PD follow-up is, you know, difficult. We've already done our 10 days, and, you know, lucky we had Election Day is another opportunity to do some follow-up. So that'd be one of the things that we'd have to think about, that typically our district days are built on, we do one thing when the district has time, and it's followed up on each quarter. So that may be something we're happy to survey though and find out.
All right, Mr. Moore?
I'll briefly.
Thank you.
You guys haven't already set up the committee for these, 'cause I would absolutely, as a board member, like to be participating in that.
Certainly, we'll invite you.
On top of that, if you could, and again, this is for both my benefit and everyone else, once we kinda get through that, if you could share kinda what the process looks like, 'cause some people may not, like, what goes into this building calendar, who's surveyed, who is participating. I don't specifically need names. The names may be helpful as well, but I think it would be helpful for us to understand how is this built, because sometimes it feels like, I know when I first came on the board, I felt like there was a pretty transparent process 6 years ago, and then somehow in the middle there, a calendar just showed up on our desk one day. So I would like to go back to where there was a very clear process of there were meetings involved, and parents and these teachers were involved, and this is how it was formulated. We even had a few of them speak at meetings, kinda saying how they came to certain changes.
Okay.
I think that would be helpful for everybody.
And as you know, we do have some certain things, we have to get in 150 days of instruction, so we do try to do a base calendar. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to fall
Can I go backwards to something we missed, the compliance report?
Sure, compliance report.
You don't have to go over the whole thing. I have a specific, as you can probably guess. Let me go change pages here. One of the questions I had, and I appreciate you guys making the updates to that. I think you had updated the TSSAA part, some of the other parts to reflect more current, guidelines from the Department of Health and some other stuff. So the question I did have was on page 25 of that, which is the sample letter going out, and it's an issue I've personally brought up a few times. I just wanna kinda talk through this. One of the things that is talked about on there was, and that's the sample, by the way, for anybody not reading it, is the sample letter that goes home to students.
I don't have anything attached to mine.
It's not? Did y'all pull it off of it? It is, or it was. I have it saved from later. Hold up. It's no longer attached.
Go up one
Hold
if you're
up.
talking about compliance.
Yeah, is it not on there? Then I'm on the wrong one, sorry.
Yeah, that's kinda what I was
I got mixed up on my things.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that with reopening plan
Never mind
update
then.
down the
Scratch
down
that.
the list.
I've got too many windows open.
But just on the compliance report, it is, currently, schools are looking at they will report on their compliance, we'll compile it, and there'll be one district report. If there are any, things that we need to correct, of course, you see in the compliance report, we will see, you know, the deadline to correct it and what we're doing to correct it.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move to, resolution for testing moratorium. Mr. Hickman, or either one of you.
Representative, Scott Sapicki he wants to bring before the legislature, because when they brought out their talks on doing away with the accountability for testing this year, one of the things that they're worried about is they will not pursue that until the spring. So he wants to have a little beef to go in and say, we don't need to forget about our schools that have block scheduling in their fall EOCs, because the way it stands right now, fall EOC, the EOCs will count as part of the students' grades, which can be problematic for the students that take it in the fall. Then the different students take the same class in the spring and theirs doesn't count, and it can affect GPA. So Representative Sapicki has asked us as a board if we would consider doing a testing moratorium that specifically states fall testing. And so the resolution that I sent, presented to you specifically says on the very bottom, fall testing.
Any discussion on this? Is this, agreeable to put on consent agenda then? I see a couple heads going up and down, a couple others. Okay, this will go on consent agenda. Thank you for sharing that with us, and, I guess after we vote on it, it's when we'll let Representative Sapicki know. Moving on to zoning and facilities, Mr. Perriman.
Good evening, y'all. 3.42, the capital projects report, it's an FYI. I do wanna just point out, we uploaded a new one this afternoon. In looking through the agenda, we just discovered that an old one had been uploaded and it didn't reflect the proper number. If you go back and look, it's the $51,000 that was left over from the Battle Creek Athletic, project. It is now reflected in there, and I just point that out because we did have to make that change this afternoon. Other than that, nothing's changed on that report. The train report, again, is just an FYI for you. So the first action item we would have is 3.43, and that's the replacement of scoreboards due to lightning at Spring Hill Middle School. This is the outside scoreboards there, and everything is falling under our insurance claim. We are going ahead and paying for, we get a supplement of about half on the front end. We purchase the boards, have them up, and once we have the final invoice, the insurance comes back and reimburses us the difference. And this is just going through Middle Tennessee Scoreboard to get those scoreboards up or ordered but it will all be money that will be reimbursed fully, half on the front end, and then we'll catch it up backwards once we have the final invoice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore.
All right. And I'd actually mentioned this to Dave Hall, and I know, since on the capital projects report, I would ask that if we could consider where parking at Bridle Creek Middle School falls into that. I just, as an observer, having gone to a couple of sports games, it became very clear that when we cut a certain parking lot out of those plans, people are still basically parking in the grassy area.
Well, I will echo two things. One, y'all must have our offices bugged, and if you have mine bugged, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. 'Cause it is a safe zone when the door is closed, just there so everybody knows. But secondly, we are, that parking lot that was cut out there by the bus, loop is probably the single biggest regret that we have at Battle Creek. They did it just on the front end saying, you know, we don't have this money. I will be honest, I brought, lighting to you as a priority because I thought if I hit while the iron's hot, I'll get lighting and I can get a parking lot later. If I get the parking lot now, we'll never get lighting down the road, and that's just being fully honest with you.
Fair enough.
We know it's an issue. It is an issue. We have several issues with that stadium that our conversation is if and when, and I know based off of conversation, a high school comes into play up there, we have to fix the mistakes that came out of that middle school. Okay. It becomes not only an issue for football, it becomes an issue for basketball because, and this is the big issue we have, everyone has to park up front and come through the lobby, and if you know, you have to go down that grand staircase. And what we found is we've had several folks that have issues when they get in the middle of the staircase and then they realize there's no railing, and what are we gonna do? If we had the parking lot that you're talking about, they could enter on that lower door, then come in by the cafeteria. It's a priority for us. As we move forward, we'll do everything we can. Okay. Even if we came in on the front end, and I know in a new facility you won't do it, even if we came in and just gravelled it on the front end until we could pave it, it would solve a lot of problems for
Yeah,
us.
and again, I'm not asking it to be moved up the list or anything. Whatever you got magic you do for your list, I just would hope it became very clear after just a few events that it's an issue.
Yeah, it's big time for us too.
Ms. Irvin?
In similar, lines in trying to, express the needs of, district schools that we serve. Wherever this may fall out, but I've spoken to different people, and a concern that's been, echoed to me is that at Santa Fe Unit School, where the playground is and in location to the building, there's been concerns by both faculty and, parents about, safety. Because if you know where that's at, they have to cross the street, and of course, that's our pickup line, some parents, flying in there. But also, it's the main access, the only access, well, within reason, you can technically, the school, but, like the big trucks like Cisco and stuff coming through there. So that's been a concern too, is to potentially look at if there is a feasible way to reroute. Like basically, I don't know, that's something I'm just asking you to maybe look at, maybe in the future if you see feasible. Moving that, somehow to where the road goes around and the playground is closer, if that makes sense, if it's a way to reroute that. And then the second issue is I know that carpeting, in like the auditorium and the library, those are beginning to really show some wear and tear from things I've seen and heard from others. So just in this future, like things I would like to ask you to keep in mind, please.
Yeah, we're looking, at that. I will say, just while we're on the topic of it, in building Battle Creek Elementary and adding the road, the loop road around Marvin Wright, what you're talking about, playground location, is a huge topic. It's one that we spent an abnormal amount of time on, if you believe it or not, just how that route does flow around. Unfortunately, when we talked Saturday, I said that Santa Fe was one of the ones that can't be expanded. Our bigger concern with the playground is it sits on top of a septic field, which is an issue. But there's really nowhere at that school other than to change the actual road. Everywhere you could put it, you put it outside of the road, and that traffic is going to flow that way. I will have Mr. Berry look at that from a safety point of view, but those things, I hate to say we're addressing those in the new buildings, but that's what we're trying to do, and we're talking about that. But if you would, and I would say this to all of you guys, as folks come to you with those concerns, please push those forward, either verbally to us or through an email, because sometimes those are just the things that we don't see. And they say, we've just done a lot of carpeting, but the carpeting in that auditorium has never been one that, when we ask people what's going on, they never say that. But thank you. So I would just take that opportunity to say, please pass along those concerns when you get them.
Okay, back to our item that was the replacement of the scoreboard due to lightning at Spring Hill Middle School. Is there consent? All right, going to consent.
On 3.44, you just approved at the last board meeting, the money for the mulch. We actually did bid that. It opened right after you approved it. If it hadn't gotten approval, we just wouldn't have followed through with it. But we do have a bid from, and I'll let Mr. Hall speak to that if he needs to. He actually did the full bid, and I'll let him just kind of give you the process that we'll go through for that, just so you do know.
When we did 5 years ago, when we did the mulch the last time, I kind of used the same formulas, but I added a little bit of mulch or price per dollar for installation and the mulch, just because everything else has gone up. They actually came in at $68,000. Well, there's two bidders. One was $70,000, one was $68,000. And we did the same process that we did last year. We just kind of started, if it called for, a playground called for 5 inches, we trimmed it down to 4, or took an inch out everywhere just to see that we could get it in within our budget. And we did, and I've talked to the guys with Benchmark was the company that came in, and we've already worked on it, and we're ready to go.
Just so you do know, they're going to dump all the mulch. We're actually talking about having it all dumped probably behind Withorn on the parking lot, and then they'll disperse it from there. So if you get a call and says, why did Withorn get all the mulch? They didn't. It's just going to be our process.
We'll move that one to consent if there's no objection. Under policies, policies 1.206. Ms. Parker.
I'll speak to that, 'cause you'd asked me to get with Jake about this when we brought it up the last time. I think Jake did a good job. It's reflected in the policy, the addition that would be added, and that was just based on the conversation that we had the last time, if there's suggested changes or whatnot. But it really vests a lot of the, authority with the chairman if there's consecutive absences to at least make sure that taxpayer money isn't going to a board member that's not able to fulfill their duties at a voting meeting.
Okay. Any further, Mr. Moore?
You know I've always got something to say. So similar to when we discussed this last time, I guess my only issue with this was that it limits it only to the full board meetings and not work sessions. Because I guess fundamentally an issue, I guess I could back up. I still kind of have trouble with this entire change, and I hate to kind of be in a place where we feel like we need to do it. But that said, I always have trouble with kind of the distinction between a full board meeting and a work session, being that so much work, as we're finding tonight, is going to take place on this, and then we're just going to essentially kind of stamp off on what we've already worked through the hard work tonight, and this wouldn't even count towards this setup. So my ask would be if we could look at something that was worded in a way that it didn't exclude the work sessions. That would be, I guess, the only thing that for me, and I don't know if you could get some feedback on that, Kristen, I'd appreciate it.
I think that could easily be done with this. We would just, instead of we'd just take out the voting part, 3 consecutive board meetings. So, I mean, that would including
Sure.
work sessions, board meetings, specially called meetings.
I'd find that acceptable, personally.
The only thing that may be a little bit troublesome is somebody comes in late, leaves early, that kind of thing. You know, with, I guess with a voting meeting, you have a present marking. There is something in the minutes that someone can go back to. That.
Are we logging this? I mean, I think we have to, or we?
Not anymore.
But
Shirley just does it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. There won't be a distinction there, so I guess if somebody shows up, regardless of how long or just as long as they're at some point present at the meeting, that you're okay with that part?
If you're here, you're here, I mean.
Okay.
I think that's part of the discussion that the chair would probably have.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, I can make that change.
And I'm all for making a change, but at the very last sentence, it says such as severe illness or military employment. Having been chair and been concerned about this actually for a year, it still gives the chairman that discretion, but then at the same time, we're really thinking about a circumstance right now in which there was a severe illness. So it kind of just takes it, okay, but there is a severe illness, so it takes, all right, and the other thing, if you include work sessions, you could have a call special, a work session, and a regular meeting in a month when someone had an illness. So the chairman, at his discretion, could say, well, you know, they're kind of a thorn in my side, so let's just, whatever. So I'm not sure that, I really think that regular attendance at a voting meeting, when we need a quorum, is how it ought to read.
Ms. Irvin?
Well, I'm just reading through this honestly, and I'm all for this as well. We've all seen, I was just wondering if it was a way to do like an abandonment of duties. I didn't know what that was, but I mean, I guess after 3 consecutive monthly meetings, you're there, but I also want to ensure, like, if one of us was to get, in a horrible car wreck and, and I guess that's where it's saying, like, if it's are we given, and I'm sorry, I'm reading through it, but I'm also hearing the discussion, is it given an allotment for, like, a reasonable absence, like if we're laying in ICU at Vanderbilt fighting for our life? Are we exempted or are we not? I don't know.
Well, I think really the discretion is with the chairman. So, I mean, if you're in the ICU and the chairman knows that, if they decide to cut off your pay, that's kind of a dirty move, Michael, but, just kidding.
No, and that's
I'm
one thing
just
I wanna
kidding.
kind
But
of.
I think that gives you a little bit of a wiggle room, and I think too, you know, if you have something, I mean, you know, if you're part of the issue is that there has been a lack of communication. When I was chair, when Ms. Kinzer was chair, it's just been an ongoing issue, and the main purpose of this, I would say, is to try to make sure that taxpayers are not spending their money on somebody who's not fulfilling their duties, and we really don't have much authority to, replace anybody that's not fulfilling their duties, but we can at least make sure that they're not benefiting financially, was really kind of the point of this, and if somebody's money motivated, then they'll come to the meetings, hopefully.
Well, and that's one thing, to your point of someone who's, you know, incapacitated for 3 months. I will point out, we're not taking them off the school board. We're just not gonna pay them until they get back. I also will say, if somebody is not able to attend the meetings for 3 months, but they're still in regular communication, saying, hey, what did I miss? This is what concerns me. That is very different than somebody saying, hey, I hadn't talked to this person in 11 months. Does anybody know what's going on? It's a very different situation. So, I don't have a problem either with leaving it as a voting meeting, just for the simple fact that, you know, come March, April, or May, we could have 2 budget meetings in a week, 2 budget meetings the next week, and if you're gone for 2 weeks, you're done. So,
May I speak to, just because, as you all know, we've talked about this, I've even talked to TSBA about it, about what to do about this, and what the right thing to do about it is. But I also know that at work sessions, if someone misses a work session, you're missing the real discussion of what's going on at a meeting. So if you don't even watch the tape, which that happens, you don't even watch it and see what was said, then you come to the meeting and you don't know and all of a sudden you're gonna take up our time, your time, everything, because you haven't done the work. And so I think this board has been present. I'm not really speaking of that. I'm just saying, I know that there's been budget meetings, that we've had many budget meetings when I didn't see some board members for multiple meetings. And then the budget comes up and the first thing that's said, well, I need these things explained. And we're all going, what? And not that we could explain them, I don't mean that, but I'm just saying that the problem with someone missing a work session is that they can't vote very well, unless they're doing the work at home, if they can, and they can. I think missing 3 voting meetings when they're not allowing us to have a proper quorum, and that's happened many times. I think that's the way it ought to be, not.
okay, thank you. Mr. Sims?
I'm definitely on board with this, but I feel that if we think it's serious enough for us to put it into policy, that we should put it to a vote at the 3rd meeting of that absence and vote, the whole board vote, instead of putting the whole onus on the chairman. And that way, the person, whomever it may be, or hopefully will not be, the chairman is gonna be on the line for a very important decision and possibly civil decision down the road. I think it needs to be a board decision by vote.
Mr. Frogart, I had a quick question.
Yes.
And that was gonna be my part of it, is our office pays the payroll once a month to all board members, and of course the commissioners get paid once a month as well. So when we process it, right now, everybody gets paid the exact same salary every month. For our guidance, if this was to pass, that's what we would need clear guidance, or would we reach out to you to make sure we are not gonna pay this person this month? Like, some type of communication will have to be set up between our payroll accountants and the board to make sure that we are doing what you all want us to do as far as paying the correct amount of people.
Thoughts on that?
And just to speak to that, what I envisioned is that you would delegate that to the board secretary, and that would be a function that if somebody had triggered that 3 months, then, Shirley would reach out to payroll and let them know, and then also turn it back on when it was appropriate. So, I mean, that's what I envisioned with the policy. That may not be what you want to have happen, but, that's where I thought we were going.
Ask that we would probably need to put one step in there where Shirley would need to bring that to the chair to verify that no exceptions have been discussed or there is no exception made. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, just so that you collaborate with me before we contact payroll. Or you collaborate with the chair
Whoever the
before
chair is.
contacting payroll.
Because that is what we put in here.
To
Yeah.
alert you that somebody had triggered the 3-month threshold.
Correct, yeah.
That's kind of what I envisioned, that be the source of
Okay.
communication between the two bodies.
Oh, I don't know what you're pointing at, Mr. Lindsay.
Mr. Woodward, do I recall somewhere in Tennessee code where there's a minimum, it lays out a minimum payment of, it's like a minute amount. Did I dream that, or?
You keep coming up with these obscure.
Read the code on the weekend?
You're testing me on, I'm not aware of a minimum. I'll.
I was thinking, I just think I remember seeing somewhere where it was like $5 a meeting minimum. I mean, it was, I just don't want to violate that.
It's gonna be like a law school exam every time I come in. I'm not aware of it, but I'll dig into that a little bit. And I don't think TSBA was aware when, the brief discussion I had with them, I don't know of any minimum that would be violated.
If y'all were wondering how all that money is going towards in Mount Pleasant, it's that good education right there showing up. Ms. Irvin.
I'll just second what Will said. I think that's a lot of weight for a chairperson to have to carry, and a lot of accountability and backlash potential. So, I mean, I think if they've missed the third meeting, tell me if I'm correct, we usually get paid at the end of the month, right? So if they miss 3, then couldn't we put that on to vote, like it isn't our first board meeting, like we would know, like for the month coming up, like for instance, October, we'll get paid the last day of the month. So if they miss 3, like if our first October meeting, first week, we could vote on it and then them suspend their pay for that October month. Am I thinking way complicated? I am. Gotcha.
So you're saying if somebody misses July, August, and September, it
Right.
goes to the full meeting in the first week of October?
Right, and then we'll start suspending their pay, 'cause then at October.
Yeah, the
But it's for
October-
October, right?
Right.
We are paying you all at the end of the month for the meetings that you all have already attended.
Okay, so that would still make sense that
I think
way?
it would work, yes.
Ms. Parker?
I think by the time we get this all worked out, some of us may be off the board, but so I will say I'm kind of now moving towards what Mr. Moore is saying. If we're going to go through that process, I think it should be something where if you miss essentially 2 board meetings in a work session, then at the next one, because it seems to me like if we string this out to a 4th one, then we're kind of defeating the purpose, because you could go a quarter of the year without being an active participant in any way, shape, or form at our meetings. And that's really what we're trying to discourage.
Do y'all want to take another look at the wording of that then and kind of see how we can craft that? Because, like I said, I don't want it to be 3 meetings that may occur within a 2-week span. But yet, if we're looking at 3 meetings in a row, how can we word that to where we're not making that happen? Regular monthly meetings? Mm-hmm. So where do we put this then? Okay, refine it a little bit, we'll tackle it next month.
Mr. Chairman?
Bring back to the work session, just, yeah, 'cause I don't.
Yeah. And if I may speak,
Yeah, Ms.
I'm not trying to protect my spot or this other person's spot. I'm trying to protect the chair's spot in saying that I think that that's a lot for that person to potentially carry, but maybe it's not. Maybe he can, yeah. He's got it.
Mr. Lindsay.
I actually found it. I'm gonna pat myself on the back.
TCA code app on your phone?
No, just the website. And this is how weird it is. It says that no member of any board shall receive less than $4 per day for the member services. I don't know what $4 a day means. I don't know if that's $4 times 365 or if that's $4 per meeting. I don't know what that means, but. Yeah, I mean, that's what, whatever we do, I just wanna make sure we don't violate that by not paying them anything.
Mr. Howe, just real quick, and kind of going along with this, Mr. Cobb, you had, on the website, we're gonna put what our attendance was. Where is that on the website? Or is it on the website yet?
It is, as soon as you click on board, school board, tab. Yeah. All right, well, I'll let you finish. Make sure everybody signed it. Okay, while y'all are looking at that, let's go ahead and bring back some reworked phrasing to the full, the regular board meeting. And then if we need to work on it any further, we'll kick it back to the work session at that time. All right, number 2, final adoption. Do we have anything for under that? No. Posted policies, discuss formation of policy committee for biannual policy review. Let's have that discussion. Who does the chair appoint that, or, okay? Guess I better get busy then.
Just we put some suggestions in there. The TSBA offered some information about, life cycle of a policy and also recommended months to review policies. I think if you look at our board policy, certainly us doing one section of the month would be very trying on staff. So we would recommend once you appoint a chairperson, or if that's what the board wants to do, that we would meet with that chairperson and kind of work out a section of policies to review each month that we could complete this task, because we need to be on task to reviewing policies so that we can get through the whole policy manual. It's within 2 years is what we have to do.
Okay. What is our process to proceed then, other than just appointing? Tell me how this is gonna work out.
So once you appoint a chair, I guess it depends on what the board wants to do, whether you want a policy committee, and like we had in the past, it consisted of, I think it was 1 or 2 board members, and they met with staff, they met with our policy person, and they set up a schedule to review policies, and then from there, so if it was finance and we needed finance people to help, that's when they met and reviewed. If it was instruction, it would be instruction, and so on. But we would set up a schedule for review.
Okay. Are there any board members that would be interested in tackling the policy piece of this? Yes,
I'd be
sir.
willing to help. I don't know how much time this consists of, but, no. Well, I'm always glad to help. Can we, each pick a part of the policy?
I guess actually the committee could decide that on their own, I would think, if we had enough interest in doing it. We have one volunteer that's expressed interest, Mr. Moore. Moore and Parker. Now,
Mr. Chairman, if I could say, if we could do it, if you could assign a chairperson from the group that's here, I think we could probably get with staff and come up with kind of a framework and talk about ways to do this. I know previously when we were under the old committee structure, we actually had 5 board members, I think it was, on each one of these, and we would go through it. The only, like I said, the caution piece I would say on this, especially if we start to getting into really reworking or removing some things. I know we just did that, 3 years ago with TSBA brought the new policies on, or 2. is, back to what, Ms. Kinzer said, is you do run the risk of a policy committee doing a whole lot of work to bring something up, and then people who weren't in on those discussions just kind of come in and throw it out the window because they don't like something that shows up. So there needs to be a little bit of, in my opinion, if the board is gonna choose to have a committee, they need to put some trust in that committee to do some good work, and to bring them, not to just discard all the work they do, but to have some trust that there was some good work put into it with staff, and that a decent product that may need some tweaking is brought to you, not that you're just gonna disregard it all and start the discussions from scratch.
Okay. Mr. Lindsay?
Kind of, maybe a little pushback on that. I think that, I think the purpose of this review is to see if something's out of date, if something's no longer, needed. I'm not sure that it's, if you guys decide to change the whole policy, I think that's a different conversation rather than you bring something to us, say, hey, we need to take out this word here because it's no longer applicable.
Okay. Thank you. What I would ask then, out of the three who have expressed interest, does anybody want to be, or be willing to be the chair? If not, I'll have private conversations with you on the side. I won't put you in a spot in public, but I don't want anybody to not have the opportunity to shine as the chair of the policy committee. Ms. Kinzer?
I'm just saying, these are really great people to be in there. Ms. Parker was chairman of the policy committee and did a great job on that committee, so,
I'm not gonna put anybody on the spot.
I'm just telling you what a
Well,
great job she did.
I will actually, I'll call each one of y'all individually and get any interest that may be, and then.
No, just a compliment.
Now, I don't know if I've shared my, my rule that I always had in class, that if you volunteered somebody to do something, you had to do it yourself.
Well, but you're a member of the committee yourself, so.
Yeah. All right. Let's, I'll have the conversations with you three, and we'll kinda go from there. All right, review policy 6026, 6304, 6341. Mr. Hickman.
Yes, since we have not had a committee, we have been reviewing critical policies that need to be looked at again, and one was one we brought before you about the transfer zone exemptions, which the policy 6206, that is the original one in our policy manual, so you can have comparisons. The policy we're bringing before you is the revised policy 6206. I've talked to TSBA. This is a policy we don't even have to have in a manual. We can just have a procedure for transfer and not a policy. So you have options with this one. The way the revised 6.206 is, I worked with Ben Torres and we crafted this. It keeps it kind of open because it allows you to have a procedure that goes with this policy. Because as we start talking about the nasty word of looking at closing McDowell, we may have to revamp a procedure we don't want to put in policy because of what if a school's at 90% and we're needing to move some kids or allow some students that are being moved to move. So we want to keep it open where we can dictate policy for each year, which is okay. The policy itself just gives us that flexibility and tells us how we're going to do our procedure. It also lines out and gives us a tremendous burden by saying we're only going to allow transfers during that 1 month. On that, we will include, as I said, in a policy, which schools will be open to having a transfer allowed because of capacity. And do you want me to talk about these one at a time or just kind of hit them all?
Let's do one at a time.
Okay.
Mr. Moore.
Okay, so, kind of to go globally on that, I know this is an area of heartburn for some of us over the last few years of the whole policy versus procedure. I actually would prefer this to be in policy, simply because I feel like this is something we need to be very transparent about, and it needs to be very upfront and clear. For actually the same reasons you're describing, that you would like to have some flexibility. I would like us to be able to have a parent and the students to be able to have something very clear to understand what the rules are. I had a call just the other day from a parent asking, you know, how did transfers work, how to, you know, in system, and it would be nice to be able to have a very clear document that it's in policy, this is how we do it. Now, on that, I guess I still envisioned kind of a two-stage trigger process of that percentage, was the way I had looked at that. I know that's getting into the weeds, but I still think, there kind of needs to be that transfer piece, plus there's some, the piece that requires us to do some other internal things, and I guess that would be a procedure side of us, making sure we're running that building as efficiently as possible. So I guess that's broader than just the transfer piece. I know that was discussions we had at the facilities side of that. And I'm not sure how that looks in policy, but I think I would prefer to have this policy actually lay out of what that number is and how it's arrived at, so that if someone were to look at that, someone could say, well, this is why. Because in the past, I'll be honest, I've had parents say, well, I'm just not sure why I was turned down.
So you're saying that, like, that threshold of 90% is capacity, is that what you're saying?
If that's what our threshold is, yes,
Okay.
I would like to have that laid out very clearly, so that it's clear for anyone that reads our policy manual to understand
Okay.
it.
Absolutely, that's easy to put in.
Mr. Sims?
And I'm just asking a question, would it be helpful for if in the policy we added, you know, where it says, if space is available where the school has not reached capacity as determined by the district, would it help if we put, you know, one student adding can add a whole nother teacher into that school by putting it, that classroom over capacity? Do we need to add just one word or, you know, in there so that we could prevent that from happening possibly?
Could you point that out again, exactly which line you're on?
Just where it says, in the red, it says if space is available where the school has not reached capacity as determined by the district, if we put, if space is available where the school / classroom and or classroom maybe. I mean, I'm not saying positively put that, I'm just bouncing that off some other people.
And one thing I do want to be transparent about, I do want you guys to read this if you haven't yet, because what it does stipulate is after that March 31st date, we're closing it off because we're seeing a tremendous problem right now of kids shopping for remote schools. And it's become a very, because we have no policy stopping that right now. So those are some of the concerns we have, and not just looking forward when remote may be not a thing next year, but where, you know, we want to be able to have stable classrooms, stable numbers, and what's in the best interest of the children, which, once again, that goes back to stability at a school in a classroom. Now, it does give parameters for me as the superintendent, or as we know in policy, my designee, to say, we see hardship there after that date, and we will grant transfer. So it does give that flexibility in this policy.
I just have a problem with out of zone, period. And here's the problem with it. What we to take this policy here, March 1st, we have no idea what our enrollment looks like August 1st. We have a situation now where we have in one grade level in a school, I think Mr. Perriman told us it was 9 out of zone in that grade level that caused an extra teacher. So if we may be good on March 1st, but if we have 4 kids move in that zone and we have 9 out of zone, those out of zone may cause us to have to add another teacher, but we don't know that till August. So are we going to August 1st, or are we going to tell the kid that he can't go to school where we've already granted his out of zone request? Or let's go even worse than that. What happens if we have 3 kids move in the middle of the year in October, and these out-of-zone kids cause us to have to add another teacher? Are we going to bite the bullet and spend $65,000 extra dollars on a teacher because we allowed these kids to go out of zone? I just struggle with it because when I was on the board the first time, and this is kind of what David's getting at about heartburn, we did rezoning is terrible. It's awful. It's the worst thing that will ever happen to this board and to you guys. And we rezoned kids out of Marvin Wright and had people threaten us during the meeting. This place was packed. And then, I don't know, you guys probably remember a number, but a huge number of them, we went through all this trouble, rezoned them to Howe, and then 60 or 70 of them go out of zone somewhere. So why did we go through all this heartache if we were just going to let them go back there to begin with? So here's the way I see it personally. I get that there's different opportunities offered at our high schools right now, just mainly because of the size of the schools. It just is what it is. But from an elementary and a middle school standpoint, if we're not across the board doing the same thing we should be, so I would personally like to put a moratorium on out-of-zone students in elementary schools and middle schools, but still give that option to high schools, because again, we spent 3 hours Saturday talking about a plan, and it appears our plan is leading toward possibly a county-wide rezone. So Mr. Perriman's going to do a bunch of work. His staff is going to do a ton of work. We're going to create this whole new county-wide rezone, but then we're going to tell kids, we're going to let you go wherever you want to go, as long as we got room to. And we might, and at what point do we fill a school up, possibly, with out-of-zone requests? Then who do we start kicking out? After we pass that 90% mark, if we've got, I mean, let's just use real-life numbers. I think Mr. Perriman said there was 100 and some odd kids in Hampshire out of zone. So 141. So let's say we reached that 90 or reached some number where we can't handle anymore. Which one of those 141 do we decide leaving? I just think that out of allowing just an open enrollment is just presenting us a ton of problems right now. It's a ton of capacity problems, and I just think we can solve our problems. And it's a hardcore line to take, I get. But there was a time this county there was a moratorium on elementary school out of zones, and Mr. Gaines probably remembers it. There was even a time, I think there were specific schools that didn't. I think there was a time Woodard didn't take any out of zone kids, and but so it's been done before, and I just think we're asking for problems if we continue to allow this, and we see we're fighting. We have a crunch, and GM just announced a $2 billion investment in Spring Hill, in their Spring Hill plant today. Who knows what that's going to bring? So it's not going to get any better, and I just think we're asking for problems if we. I think now is the time for us to take a hard line on our zones.
Along those lines, Wayne, I'm again talking through this. What if instead of up to a percentage of capacity, is that maybe we set an allowable percentage of students at the building that could be out of zone? Like you only allowed this number of kids based on the population of the school that could be out of zone, and once you reach that, you're full. I'm just thinking of different ways we could do it, because I'm tending to lean the way you're going, Wayne, on that, is that we're kind of putting ourselves right back up to the limit of where we're right into a mess, potentially. So I don't know if there's other ways to handle that.
That's currently the way our policy reads is 5%, and you see how it's
5% up to, I'm sorry.
It gives schools up to, it's just a blanket statement of, if you look at I think it's in the other policy, it's blanket 5%. Every school, regardless of capacity, can take up to 5%. That is the current policy.
Take up to 5%?
Can go up to 5% zone zone exemptions, transfer applications.
That's in our policy? Because that doesn't sound right.
So if there's 400 students, they can have 20 out of zone. Correct.
That's not how we wrote that policy.
Blow that policy out of the water every day.
That is, remember, that is one of the reasons you guys asked me to look at that policy, was because, you know, at what point do we say that?
I'll just be honest, that didn't sound like that.
Yeah, that was, we were looking
Well, then if that's the case, then I guess, Wayne, I'm probably closer to where you are on this, that maybe it's a time we need to look at doing that and seeing what the impact is in that way, because again, one of the things I brought up several times, and I brought it up at the weekend retreat, was about the, in the Spring Hill area, a lot of the high-density homes, is the variability of those rooftops already gives us heartache. Throwing in the random out-of-zone request just piles onto that, so that, one day it seems nice, and all of a sudden, come the next year, and you're over. And again, I know our policy says we can ask some students to leave, but which one gets asked to leave, and how do you do that? So,
There are too many mics on. I'm good now. Mr. Lang said that the procedure currently is 5% of the projected population of the school. So that's the procedure. So,
Because, just to clarify that, I'm looking at the original policy, it just uses the phrase that if adequate space is available, so then that's where your procedure comes in, is to define that phrase. Ms. Irvin?
You know that I think differently, but, of course, I look at the emotional side of it. I appreciate the financial and the side that Mr. Lindsay, I fully, see that side as well, but my question is are we gonna allow, I got a couple of questions, but one is, are we gonna allow the kids that are already there to be grandfathered in? 'Cause like I know several kids that have been at, say, Hampshire their whole career, and now they're like facing, like, when we do this, they'll be a junior. Are we gonna kick them out at 2 years, left in there? And it's been working, we've already got our population probably, base, so that's one. Two, I think when we say a moratorium, I think that we need to make sure that it's, also includes, with directors', input, because I know I've seen some toxic situations before. There's a lot of dynamics that go on in families and communities, and I mean, like, I know some of our schools, I don't know if it's as relevant now, but like gangs and things where you're looking at a child's safety potentially being a real threat, or family drama where, I mean, I've seen everything. So there's some situations where some kids, it's not just a educational standpoint, it's a safety standpoint. So, I mean, I don't like the word moratorium, because that's like no, none, zilch, and I don't know. I mean, I personally, one thing I like about Murray County, and like I say, I appreciate Wayne's perspective, but I mean, a lot of people really have enjoyed that luxury that we've given them, and I know sometimes we got to pull that, but we've given our parents a freedom in their choice of schools, and that's a big thing that's been pushed into, and sometimes, as a parent, I know a lot of parents appreciate that, so for whatever that's worth.
Mr. Howell?
I'm actually going to agree with Ms. Irvin. I am a product of an out-of-zone. I spent the first part of my life in Water Valley, in Santa Fe. Went to kindergarten in Santa Fe. My mother worked at Stauffer Chemical, and it was very that first year in kindergarten, she could not make it work out. My dad was on the road, he traveled, he worked for the railroad, he was constantly coming and going. It made sense for me to go to Mount Pleasant School. That's where my mom was working. It's where she was 8 to 10 hours a day. So it's more than just, I want my kid to go to this school or that school. Sometimes there are just extenuating circumstances that it just makes it better for our parents. And if it makes it better for our parents, it's probably going to make it better for our students, which is the main goal, is our students.
Mr. Fulbright, can I say one thing?
Yes.
I hate to chime in, but we meet on the 3rd for your board meeting, and you asked me to bring a presentation to you on the 17th of next month. Any sort of districting zone or zoning plan is very dependent upon direction in this matter. Especially as I got a second request on Saturday to try to see if elementary schools could house an additional group of students. I can effectively eliminate this question through zoning elementary schools, because I can fill them up, but then I need to know the board's direction on how we're going to look at that, because if it's a 90% threshold, if it's a 5% threshold, if it's a certain number, that's going to play a great role in my staff's work over the next month. I know I can't get an answer tonight. I know I may not have a full answer on the 3rd, but just please know that when we come back on the 17th, when we leave here on the 3rd and we start work on the morning of the 4th, any sort of decision you make on this is going to recalculate us as we head toward the 17th. And I'm just saying that this is kind of chicken and egg type stuff, because it all goes hand in hand.
Mr. Lindsay?
Just kind of touch on Chad's point, I guess maybe moratorium's not the right word I should use. I don't have a problem with, if we put some clause in there that, in the example you used, with employees bringing their kids, I understand those things, but again, I know I'm picking on them, it's just an example that got used, but 120 kids out of 300 and 403. I mean, that's so I get it, and then of course I have a huge amount of frustration that we have a procedure in place where principals are not supposed to accept more than 5%, and then we have 141 out of 400. So I'm just kind of flabbergasted at that, but because it doesn't seem like, you know, a teacher here, a teacher there, it off the top doesn't seem like a whole lot, but before long we are $2 or $3 million, spending $2 or $3 million more than we really would have to if kids went where they're supposed to go to school. So there can be some exceptions to that, but to just open up the doors and give principals the autonomy to take whomever they want, it's not working, because that's what we're doing now.
Mr. Howell?
I mean, I understand the effort to work towards 100% efficiency. But if we're not educating those kids at Hampshire, we're educating those kids at Mount Pleasant or at Woodard, or, you know, there are kids that are out of zone everywhere. We're still going to have to educate those kids. They still have to have a teacher. I think we're splitting hairs at how many extra teachers we're having to have. I would say it's less than, I'm just going to say 10, 20 at the most, and I don't think we're talking about a lot of teachers. Well, it is, but out of a $105 million budget, I mean, I understand, but are we ever going to operate at 100% efficiency? No. Would I love to do that? That'd be great, but that would mean we would have like 6 schools.
Ms. Parker?
I guess I'll push back a little bit on the idea of operating at 100% efficiency. If that's not our goal, and I can understand that, I don't think you can necessarily say because we can't operate at 100% efficiency, we should just operate inefficiently, which is what we're doing now. That doesn't make logical sense to me either. So I think we've got to, I mean, I agree with Mr. Lindsay. Our high schools are different, and even at a unit school. I mean, if you've gone all the way through at a unit school, and then for some reason you move to another place and you want to go back to the unit school, maybe you know, because of the whole K-12 concept, maybe we should let them be able to go back and include them as a part of the high school setting. But I really think we've got to do something, because I do not want to go through a rezoning process and have a bunch of not nice emails and then it all be for naught. I mean, kind of gone down that road before, and I think if we don't set some clear parameters, again, I think it goes back to having that administrator salary schedule, because there's an incentive right now to bump up your enrollment and to recruit, essentially. And I don't think, while I appreciate, again, the initiative that some people will show with that, that's not really what I think we want to do. And we need to figure out a way to make all of our schools equitable. I mean, going back to the discussion we started with Kids on Stage, if all of our schools are doing what they need to do and able to provide the education that we want, and we have those academic standards set, then there really shouldn't be a difference between Baker and Woodard, or Baker and Riverside, or Baker and Howell. And I think a lot of it is a perception that we are essentially fostering in our community by what we're doing with just kind of these blanket out of zones.
Mr. Hickman?
Kind of to draw this all back in, that's why first of all, we use the 90%, but just in case people wanna move back in. Or we have people that move into that zone during that time, that's why we don't cap it at 100. The other thing is we have the discretion of looking at schools and saying, this is a closed school. We will only list those schools that are eligible for you to apply for a transfer. The next thing is when we're talking about when we do a rezone, you know, we can always do an exception to the rule, and I've seen it in other districts where we say there is no zone exemptions back to that school. There is none. We can say that. And if that is the board's will, we will enforce that and make sure it does not happen if we ever do a rezone. Many times what you see, though, is when you have like a new school, you'll let the exit grade be able to have that opportunity, but no other grades do that. But when you're talking about if you're talking about a mass full rezone, you can do an exception that year and say there will be no zone exemptions to that. Okay. Once again, I just want to reiterate that we tried to look at all these questions we talked about. One was making sure we have that flexibility to have percentage where we're not accepting zone exemptions to 100%. Two, we also took the name principal out, and all authority is now to the superintendent or my designee. Three, the one reason why we put that March 1st to the May 30th is because it will give us a better picture of what our schools will look like in August before we get to August and then we're figuring it out right then. It gives us some of that allotted time to look at that.
Ms. Irvin, did you still want to say something?
Well, I mean, yes, and Mr. Hickman, thank you for your response. I think that's great. I just want to say, I guess you all know where I stand with unit schools, and I'm here to sell them. But I can tell you, like, I think maybe people, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think everybody, I think they think, oh, if we get to this 1+, then we're just got to hire a whole new teacher. Well, I know for a fact, because I've seen all the dynamics of Santa Fe, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong, it's not just that grade, it's an average of a span of grades. So is that still true? Kind of, sort of. Because I know that my son, his kindergarten year, he's got one of the higher enrollment grades, and because of that, in kindergarten, which used to be 20, he had 25. And it worked out because it averaged with some of the other grades. The average worked. Also, I have been there to where I have seen, if it's a drastic need, let's say you have a really big kindergarten population, the next year's population is really small. A lot of those teachers, even though it's a hard job for a teacher, a lot of those teachers are so, they buy into the unit school concept that a lot of times they'll gladly roll up. And I know, like, for myself, which is 100 years ago, but I had the same teacher, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. And let me tell you, that was the most dynamic thing. That woman has been a part of my life still. I mean, she was like a second mother. So I'm just saying, and I know that that's a lot, but a lot of teachers at a unit school are willing to bend more. Anyway, just for what that's worth.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Would it be, on the revised plan, would it be possible to add something on the 6.206, to add something in there that would language of what you just described, that during a rezone, you would not be able to go back to the school you were zoned out of? Because I'll be honest, that piece alone would go a long way for making it more palatable to me. Simply because, again, going by what Mr. Lindsay said, that's exactly what happened last time we did a rezone. And if we are truly looking at solving a problem by doing a countywide rezone, it would absolutely undermine everything we did if people could just sign back up, as long as they're under the 90% of just going back to the school. It would just undermine all of it and would be pointless. So if there's some language like that that could be added, I think that would help me. I'm not sure about anybody else, but that would go a long way.
Wouldn't there be exceptions, like staff, children of staff?
We have to add those exceptions because that is in the MOU.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Lindsay?
I don't want anybody to get me wrong, it's not a unit school issue, that's not, this can happen in any school. And the numbers, I mean, K through 12, average of 20, no classroom can have more than 25. So we have a real life situation, we have 27 kids in a one grade, in a first grade. It causes you to have two teachers. Because we can't put more than 25 in that classroom. That's the max. So that kills your average for the rest of your school as far as K through 3 goes. But it with what we have before us, again, I just struggle with that. There's nothing in there that prevents us from adding positions that could be caused by out of zone requests being granted. Because again, we don't know. March 31st, I get that we're going to look at that as our projections, but I think I just saw today where looking at some numbers, Mount Pleasant High School's gained 20 kids since August the 11th. Now that's a high school, and we're talking. I'm not talking about those necessarily, but that can happen in elementary schools. So if we allow those out of zones, if we allow 8, 10, 40, 50 kids, and then we get an influx of 10 or 15 kids, that could kick that up. And I would a lot rather that this group of parents be mad at me tonight because of my stance on it tonight than for you guys to go on August 15th and have to tell them that, sorry, your kid can't come to school here anymore because he's out of zone and we have to move him back. I'm just trying to take care of problems on the front end rather than on the back end.
Thank you. I don't see any lights, but I want to add, or just ask a question, I guess, more than anything. The purpose of the window is at the end of the school year, you'll have a way that you'll know the enrollment for the fall, theoretically, ballpark figure. Would it then, instead of looking at the percentage of spots available at the school, you would also know your staffing needs at the school? Is there a way to put it to where it's not dependent on the percentage of seats necessarily, but the availability of staff? So if you have 4 teachers who may each have 3 spots in their class, you could theoretically add 10 to 12 students out of zone. I don't know if that would make it too complicated, or it might even alleviate some of the uncertainty, perhaps. I know we need to get an answer to this pretty soon for Mr. Perriman's sake.
Can I say, and I'm looking at numbers while you're talking, one elementary is where the bulk of it is. That's where the bulk of out of zones, 105, 104, 102, 44 seniors. I mean, it goes down just like enrollment goes down over the course of time. The other thing is, out of county brings a lot of kids into certain schools, and for most schools, the variable is not so huge. They pick up kids, they lose kids, and they offset. Unit schools outside of Hampshire, there really aren't that many more kids that go to Santa Fe than kids that leave Santa Fe. There's almost as many that leave Culleoka. There are more that don't go to Culleoka than go to Culleoka. The problem lies in those big outliers. Cox is down over 100 kids. That's huge when you start looking at Whitthorne. And you look at Whitthorne at some point maybe nearing capacity when Cox has got 100 kids not there. And then you've got an outlier like Hampshire that is just so far out. So the numbers, the variables are not always going to be something that school by school everyone's going to be going, this is horrible, because they may not come into play, because you may just have as many kids leaving as you have coming in. I think what our stance and what we need to know is those big variables can't just be there and people disappear.
Okay.
And those are the two outliers.
Thank you.
Hampshire's way up, Cox is way down.
Ms. Parker.
This is more of a procedural thing, but based on the time that the revised 6.206 was put on here, it looks like it was put on here like an hour before our meeting. And I don't really remember when I looked at it that it was I just remember seeing policy 6.206, not the revision. And I would just say that for these sessions to really be beneficial, we've got to have time to really look at this, and I think that we're kind of floundering somewhat on here of what I want, what Wayne wants, what Marlena wants, and because we really are just now seeing it, like what exactly y'all want to do. And the other thing is, if we have an existing policy, if at all possible, I would really like to see that policy like crossed out. If you want to start from scratch, cross out everything and put what you want below it. But it makes it hard to just, with the devices that we have, just to, I feel like, to jump back and forth between them. So if in the future on policy stuff, if we can just kind of, one, make sure we have it at least a week before we meet so we can really dive into it, and two, make sure that we're seeing the comparison in the same document if possible.
All right, Ms. Irvin?
I'll say this and then I'll hush, I'm sorry. I just want to say a couple of things. Number one, I know for a fact a lot of the kids, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I know several kids that go to Hampshire that are technically zoned for Santa Fe. So kind of like what Chad was saying, I think it's kind of tiff for Taft, because we may be pulling them from Hampshire and have to fund a teacher, but then you know what, then they're Santa Fe. That's one point. Number two, I'd like to say that I still believe, maybe not everywhere, maybe not across the board, but I think our unit schools, I believe if you start playing with where kids can go and where they can't go, and you remove parent choice, then I really believe there's a huge population of those kids we're going to lose to private school. Maybe that's not a big deal for you guys. I don't know. To me, that is. Third thing I'd like to say is I think the policy would make more sense if we're going to put a cap on it, instead of saying 90% of the school's capacity. Well, I've seen how that's already kind of crazy. I think it should be like 90% of grade or like grade capacity, because like for instance, I've seen some grades where you'll have 60 kids in one grade and you'll have 20 in the other. Or maybe that's probably not a good, because that's still a round number, but you get what I'm saying. Maybe like a first grade class could use some kids, or a fifth grade class is like overflowing. So maybe we should look at it on a grade level instead of a school level. It's just a thought. I don't know if that's feasible or not.
All right, okay, Mr. Howe.
And I know for a fact that's exactly how it is at Culleoka. When she looks at it on a grade by grade level, and she'll tell you, yep, I can take 3 6th graders. I can't take any 2, 3, or 4 grade. I can't take any of those grades because they're full. But I can take these. So I know that for a fact one administrator does that by grade level, so.
Okay, what I then would like to see as we go towards the meeting, our next meeting, is to, with the comments that have been given, kind of tweak this a little bit. And I would also like you to consider, you don't have to put anything in paper if you think it doesn't make sense, but kind of what Ms. Irvin and I batted around, where it's more of a, not a percentage of capacity, but more a percentage of teacher staffing capacity. If that doesn't make sense, that's fine. If it does, I'd like you to at least put something together, maybe, so we have an option. Mr. Hickman?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that, and I'll apologize to you, Mrs. Parker, because the one reason this one came up, because Ben Torres and I for 2 weeks now have been back and forth with this one to make sure we're dotting I's and crossing the T's, and Jake could probably tell you sometimes you get into just one word you get in an argument about. So I apologize for not getting it up today, because it literally was one of those 11th hour type policies, having it prepared.
Okay, but that will not be the case next time. All right, policy 6.304, Mr. Hickman.
Once again, this is a policy that we have been reviewing, and we have talked to TSBA, Ben Torres, and we both felt like it needed some things that needed to be updated on it, and make sure that some things were more clear. And so what I did was introduce added this afternoon the old policy, so that's the only one I added this afternoon, so you could have it for comparison. And then the one that we uploaded was the one that Ben Torres and TSBA we talked about. And I know that the one previously had some work done by a committee for bullying, but this one is kind of in a line to what would be considered in compliance. where the other one, there were some things that were out of compliance that we had to look at. And, I would, take any questions on this. I know this one is probably not one we will get through or vote on for the next meeting, but it is one that we do need to work on.
Okay, comments or thoughts on this? Mr. Moore?
So, along with what Ms. Parker asked, can we have these combined so that I can understand what it is now? And then comparatively, strikeouts with the addition, so that we can look at that, so that I think that's probably gonna need to go to the next work session.
This one was really, a lot of it turned upside down because there was some compliance issues.
And if it makes it a 6-page document that's a lot of red in it, that's fine. I just,
Okay.
I would like to be able to compare what we're getting rid of and what we're adding.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna bump this to the next work session, is that fine with
That's
your
absolutely.
timetable? Ms. Parker?
Well, I just wanna say, if our current policy is out of compliance, do we need to go ahead and look at approving something that is in compliance, so we're not continuing to be out of compliance?
What Ben Torres said on this one specifically, we should be okay, but we do need to address it. And, we can take Jake's opinion on that one. I'm not sure if he's schooled himself on this policy.
Am I correct to understand that the original that's put on here pretty much is totally different from the revised? The revision is a new,
It's a clean one
new
that,
write-up.
like, if you look at the old one, you can see some hints of this one on there. It's very few and
But in
far
essence,
between.
what we would have is a whole thing struck out and then a whole thing of red to replace it, pretty much.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Because it's a really different one.
Yeah.
And, some of you sat on when they did this policy, and, you would probably be able to discuss what happened there better than I would, because I was not there when they did this policy.
Ms. Parker?
No, I think this is something that Mr. Killen did a lot of, based off of stuff he read, but I would say if we get this back, can you please have like all the blanks filled in? 'Cause it like leaves, there's a blank on, I think, page 3.
It has several blanks, and like I said, this was for introduction. I just wanted to show you more tonight so we can work through it as we move forward. I did want to show you what the blank one looked at as we move forward. Like I said, it's not one that I was expecting to be adopted tonight, but I did want to show you guys so we can get ready to move on from the older policy. And the reasoning is when we get to the next one is one that we will fill in blanks by the, next meeting, because it's the one that I needed to introduce that one to talk about the next one.
Okay.
And the next one.
Wait a minute, Mr. Moore.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you're okay, I guess I get into things. Are you satisfied with the proposed one that you have here, the wording of that?
In the
Or were
sense-
you, or would, I guess, here's the simple question.
Absolutely, yes.
If you are, then if you could just prepare the document with the strikeouts showing what I'd asked for, with the blanks filled in, I think we would be prepared to vote on it at the next meeting then.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Unless you're asking the board to line item go through this and revise it. If not, then if you could prepare that document, I think it's.
I can,
I'm
and
satisfied
like
to
I
vote on
said, it's one of those that I wanted to, before I just wanted to introduce it because it needs to be changed because of the next one,
Okay.
especially.
Then let's go to the next one. 6.3041.
Okay, 6.3041 was a policy that was introduced at pre-summer. It was a policy we were supposed to adopt and put into our, policy manual. It was not. I'm not sure why it was not here, don't know. It just wasn't. And it is not just out of compliance, will be an OCR registered complaint if we do not get this one into the policy. Per statute now we have to have this policy in our policy manual because it directly states about your Title IX sexual harassment, and it is different from any other policy, and we'll talk about that more when we get back to the other one. It is one of the few policies that you have to state a person, their phone number, their address, everything on who is the one you call and talk to. And this has to be a separated policy. Why? Now, here's where the connection was. They kind of had it mumbled up in the other policy, and it needed to be taken out because it has to be a standalone policy.
Okay.
And I will entertain any questions on this one.
Mr. Moore?
I'm reading through this, it only requires a title, mailing address, phone number. Does it require an actual name?
It does. You have to list a name on this one, because this is to do with sexual harassment complaint, which they have to have a person's name of contact.
Are you
for the
prepared to have a fully filled out and ready to go one for the next meeting?
Absolutely. And just so you'll know who the name is,
and to go back to what I would rather see these things fully filled out and ready to go for these
Okay.
work sessions. Just like, put the name in there, whatever it needs to be. I wanna see it exactly
Okay.
how it's gonna be, we're gonna vote on it.
And that's the only thing that would be missing of that is the title.
Okay.
Mailing
I'd
address,
like
phone
to
number.
see as is, I mean, as we would be voting on it.
Okay.
Mr. Lindsay?
So you said it has to have a name?
Yes. And Ben Torres for the TSBA said this one has to have a name on this one.
So
And we do have a Title IX person. We have to, once again, by statute, have to have a Title IX person for this.
so we're running this lately, that we've had some policies with names of people that no longer work for the school system.
Correct.
So
And
it's gonna be incumbent upon somebody that when we have someone's name in policy and then they no longer work for the school system, we need that changed
absolutely.
immediately, and which that change requires a vote from us, which just kinda seems like a cumbersome process.
It does, and I think the problem was that some of the other policies did not require a name, but the name was put in, it was just position. Right now, the only other policy that addresses these issues are, employee complaints, not parent complaints or student complaints. Policy, the one before this, policy 6.304, it just names positions, and it can stay as thus. But for this Title IX one, it has to have a name in it, and that is my understanding. And I'll defer. Right. And I will defer to Jake, because that was what Ben Torres told me. This one had to have a person.
Agreed, but it becomes difficult because, you know, who's watching? When we have somebody leave the system, who's watching to make sure that this comes up? Then we've got potentially a lag there. I'm sorry.
And I agree. If he would've said put title, I'm all for changing all these to title. But this is the one he told me it had to be in namesake, but if you'll double check with him,
Yeah,
because
I'll
that's what I was told by
check
him.
with Ben on that.
Okay, and then we'll have that then for our meeting filled in,
Correct.
ready to go. All right?
Can I just ask?
Ms. Parker?
Since we brought up the one that has people that are no longer here that can investigate complaints, can we get that revised and brought back for the board meeting so we can go ahead and move forward with that?
Absolutely, and what I'm going to do with that one is strike out names and just put positions on that one.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, moving on then. Number 6, tenure.
I'll speak to that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board. We have two employees, two teachers that had the school year finished normally last year would have obtained tenure. The only requirement that was missing for them was the actual years of service. So, back in May, when Superintendent Marzak was still here, he petitioned the state for a waiver for one particular employee, and the waiver was granted in July of this year when Mr. Hickman took over. And it was a blanket waiver. It was a waiver that was given throughout the state for individuals who were in that same predicament where had the year finished, they would have obtained tenure. So what we did was we surveyed the principals to see if there were any more teachers that would have been eligible for this in lieu of this new granting of a waiver. And so there were two teachers. One was Miss Lauren Bell, and the other one's Allison DeMassis. So we asked the board to consider granting them tenure.
Okay, move this to consent. All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on, realizing this is a topic that we've discussed many, many times, could you, let's discuss our reopening plan update. Not saying we won't have discussion, but, let's have new discussion.
We met with our COVID response team, and I'm gonna let, Chris Pointer address this topic.
Good evening, Chair Fulbright and board members. I will entertain any questions if there are any regarding the reopening plan.
Can I just jump in with them?
Sure, go ahead.
I really think that the main focus of where we wanted to discuss with this was gonna be contact tracing and our relationship with the Department of Health, whatever their initials are.
TN.
Okay, so, let's at least start there and try to stay on that part of it for now.
I'll ask, now that I'm caught up with where I should have been. Okay. So specifically, when I was looking at the document, the letter we sent home, and this is some question I've had about it, where it says, and this is page 25 of the document, by the way, your child must stay at home until you've been contacted by the health department. Your child may not return to school until provided a release from the health department, and your child should not leave the home except to attain medical evaluation. If there's no choice but to leave the home, your child should, and it gives some requirements there. My concern all along is that we are kind of crossing over, and I know this has been a kind of an issue in the past, where we're giving, who is really contact tracing? Because it reads to me that, yet again, we're still determining that they're gonna stay away. I mean, again, as we've asked, what happens if the Department of Health does not contact you? And I've had concerns all along about how this is functionally working. Are we still operating under this model?
Yes.
So, and we feel like that's the best choice for us to do?
Yes. The original plan, as you know, is we were handling it all in-house, but the state is asking of us to submit the spreadsheets to the Tennessee Department of Health, and then they are doing the monitoring and the calling of the contact tracing.
So I guess to go with that, then, my question is, why are we then giving them medical advice if we're handing over the medical advice to the medical people? I just want to get us out of anything we don't have to be in. That's been my point all along. So for me, by giving them advice on how to handle this, I would rather if that's what we're going to do, if you are contacted by the Department of Health, you need to refer any future medical questions to them and not try to give them advice on how they should interact while they're away from the school.
So this letter that you're reading that has, how it's set up, came directly from the Tennessee Department of Health. It was a stock letter that we modified, and then we changed the language in the letter from the Tennessee Department of Health to say that the health department will be contacting you directly. Our original language was that we took on all the ownership, and the letter was modified to now put that on the Tennessee Department of Health.
But we're still telling them to stay home.
We're telling them they can't come to school.
Correct.
There's not a mandate on this sheet of paper to tell them they have to stay at home.
Your child must stay at home. Am I not reading the same thing you are?
Yeah, it says if there is no choice but to leave the home.
No, the first line, it says your child must, if you've been exposed, and they're getting this letter, right?
Yeah.
So we're telling them they must stay home. So we're still contact tracing, not the Department of Health.
We are identifying based on the parameters that the Tennessee Department of Health has given us, and then we're turning those names over to the Tennessee Department of Health.
And then sending a letter home with the student telling them they can't come back to school. So we're contact tracing.
If you wanna say we're contact tracing, yeah.
I don't know how else you say it.
Well, let me address this for a second. Right now, we have to follow the parameters of what the health department tells us to do. And right now, the Tennessee Department of Health gave schools parameters. Their parameters was, we must contact trace and we must send students home. They didn't really give us an option on what, if you feel like doing, if you will do. It was guidance given by both the state and then our local folks came in. What was happening before was, we were telling kids to go home and they would have never been quarantined at all, zero. And so, had, discussions with local and the regional Department of Health, because I felt that we were going into a collision with a FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, grievance. Sending the kid home, hey, my kid can go to Walmart, my kid can go to church, but you're telling me my kid can't go to school. So what has happened is, as I said before, the state came in and said that we're gonna be their county, the only county in the district they're gonna do this for is they have local people that are going to, we are to now, and this is guidance once again from them, fill out a form, which is people that we do contact trace, we give them that, we are asked to send them home, and they will get a call between, I think it's 48 hours, 48 to...
Yeah, within 48 hours.
Within 48 hours saying that you are now quarantined. And so right now we are having to follow the guidance, that we are given, that we are told we are supposed to do by the Department of Health. Now, I know what you're saying. We're still contact tracing, and yes, basically for that day or two before they get a contact from the health department, that we're sending them home unquarantined until they get that actual call. So the problem comes in for us, which is problematic, is once we're given this guidance, we are told to follow it. Now, the only other option to do this, to get out of that business, is that the board recommends, makes a policy that we will not send students home. If we choose that path, one of the concerns of the COVID team, and I just want to lay it out and let you know what the positives and the negatives. It's true, it might give a kid a day or two more to stay in school. But one of the negatives is what we do fear is we'll get out of the business of contact tracing, and then we'll start getting in the business of enforcers. Well, did you get your letter? Are you not supposed to be here? You're not supposed to be here. You've got to go home. And trying to weigh out what is least burdensome, we just feel that do we want to step out of one area and then step into another that might cause more controversy amongst the parents by saying, I never got that call. Okay, you can stay here. And we're just worried it may become problematic if we make a decision to stay out. It goes back to the good faith of the parents to say, if you're quarantined, you're not going to come to school.
I came in at the tail end of that. Pardon my break, but I know whatever we're doing, it's not working. My best friend in the world, we were over at her house this past weekend, and get this scenario, Tuesday before fall break, her kid was supposedly exposed. No one contacted her. They leave, they go to Florida. In Florida the whole week, living it up. She comes back after fall break on Monday. She gets a call at 10 a.m. to come pick her kid up from school, and she's like, actually she was excited because she was one of these that's like, I'm good, I get to work from home for 2 weeks. His time ended on Tuesday. She had to take off work, come get her kid for a half day, and then he had to go back the next day. At that point, it's completely ineffective. So I see the pros and the cons both ways. I mean, I personally believe our focus is education, and we need to worry about educating kids. However, I also worry about the health of our employees, and I'm very sensitive to it as well. But if we're going to do it, I mean, at that point, he's done potentially exposed everybody in the world. So I don't know if that falls on the health department or who, but I just know that that's broken.
So one of the challenges that we face with that, especially with the fall break situation, because we did have that happen across the district, is when we're actually notified of the positive case. And so when we're notified, that's when we send it up the flagpole to the Tennessee Department of Health and when people are called. Were there instances where kids were quarantined? Yes. And did they come back with a sooner timeline? Yes. We did get calls from parents who were frustrated. And fall break, to be honest with you, with that break in time and our notification, it was problematic on everyone. And so that was a difficult and very challenging time of trying to answer phone calls and deal with it over fall break. So, yeah, to that point, yes, but it's also when we only are able to respond and do something when we're notified.
But that's why I was just going to say that I know it's all mixed up and kind of wild, decision-wise, but that's the purpose of quarantining. When you get that call, you're not supposed to be out at church or at the movies or at the mall. When you've been diagnosed with an illness and you're quarantined, you're supposed to be in your home, quarantine, things wiped down. And it's unfortunate that everybody doesn't take it as serious or think in that way, but that's why we're in the shape that we're in, too, because of people just, do what they want to do. So, but that is how that works. That's how it's supposed to be designed. If you're quarantined and that's come down the pike for what you're supposed to be, that's what it means. You're not gonna be in school. When the flu happened and stuff, we would send out letters before COVID happened. Please be advised. Your kid's sick. If you have an illness, this kind of thing, they don't need to come to school. But now we have an illness that's more severe than that type, but we don't, treat it as such. But I don't really know what the grand solution is as far as tracing in the school and the health department, but we have to have some kind of format that we follow, so that it makes sense some kind of way.
Piggyback a question off of a statement you made, Mr. Hickman, about the concern that the COVID team had. Once a child has been contacted by the Tennessee Department of Health, is there any communication back to the school system that, hey, this child has been contacted and their return date should be whatever?
So we do communicate with them, and so basically when we facilitate it based on the definition of close contact, we submit who, based on the definition, could be potentially close contact to the Tennessee Department of Health. Then they determine, based on a series of interviews and questions that they ask the person who actually tested positive. So what we have stressed to the Tennessee Department of Health, if there's a huge deviation in time, like, for example, if we said the person was supposed to come back on the 5th, but for whatever reason they're coming back on the 1st, or they come back a lot later, just to kind of communicate that with us. That's only happened on a couple of occasions, and most of the time, our estimate of when a student should come back has been roughly exactly the same, or 1 or 2, a day or so possibly off. But we do communicate with them frequently, like on a Tuesday. Every Tuesday we talk and have a discussion with them, and are working to better that communication because of the way that this relationship has to work, if that answers your question.
It does. And Mr. Moore, can I ask you a question? What do you want it to look? How do you envision it looking?
I'll make it easy. What I envision is not to do duplication of work. What I envision is that we turn over the information I guess I envision it similar to the head lice letter. Just, hey, there may be an issue. If you're contacted by the Department of Health, they will tell you to quarantine, and you should take any further discussions up with your physician and or the Department of Health. And that child would stay at school until the Department of Health has determined that they should be contact traced. That's all I'm doing. I'm trying to get us out of doing the same thing the Department of Health is doing. That's what my goal would be. And it's not to stop those, because at that point, the school should absolutely, and I would see that there should be more communication back from the Department of Health. If we turn a list of potential contacts over to them, they should turn us back over a list of the people they say, based on the information we gave them, that should not be at school, so that we then can match up our records with theirs. And only one party's doing the work here. That's what I would like to see. And I know some people have kind of heard what I'm saying, and they think I'm trying to get us out of doing that. No, I just want the Department of Health to do their jobs, and for us to follow that to a T, because the Department of Health is then going to say, little Jimmy, you can come back in 14 days. And then we get that information back, and we do what the Department of Health says is what they should be doing. I want to get the school system out of this making medical recommendations on how to quarantine. I just don't want to be in the weeds of that. It's not our specialty. It's not about education. It's us doing something the Department of Health should be doing and is doing. I just want to get that language and get us out of things we don't have to be in. That's my goal. I want us to get us focused on education, and that's all we're doing. And I think we are in the weeds on things we just simply do not have to do. And to go with Mr. Hickman's comments, I know I have trouble with things you're being told in communications that in my opinion are not officially mandates of what we have to do. They're things certain people want us to do. And I think we need to be very careful that we're not just doing what some person says they want us to do, because I know there are other districts that are doing exactly what I'm describing. There are multiples. There are other counties that have their county health departments that are doing what Murray County says we're the only ones doing. There are other counties doing that too that have specific employees that are working with them, so that we're not special in that regard. But again, what I'm describing is not new. It's things that other school systems are doing. I just want the health department to do their jobs and let them do their jobs.
I think I'm starting to tend to agree with Mr. Moore. The only question I have about his proposed process is, we've been told that they would contact they'll contact people in 48 hours. My only concern is if I test positive and Chad is within 6 feet of me for 15 minutes and it takes 48 hours for the Department of Health to contact him, do we hold any liability for extending the spread even further because we didn't take some initiative? That's, if somebody tells me we hold no liability, or somebody shows me that there's scientific proof that he's not contagious for 48 hours, I'm going with Mr. Moore, but that's the only question I have about it.
I just want to make sure that from a clarifying standpoint from Mr. Moore's, the kind of the contact piece of it, I just want to make sure I understand. So basically what you're saying is just turn it all over to the Tennessee Department of Health and take our ownership piece out of it. Are you saying that you still want us to provide them with the spreadsheets, or are you saying? But I guess to my point, if we still provide them with the spreadsheets, we're still doing the exact same thing we were doing before. The only thing difference is, say that again.
Okay.
So basically, you don't want us to send kids home. You want us to do what we've been doing, but not send kids home.
Correct.
So because basically when you say put the responsibility on them and not do any double work, then they would have to do everything. That would even be including, we wouldn't do the spreadsheets.
Okay, you're making this far more complicated than it
No,
has to
I'm
be.
just trying to make sure I understand.
I want them to do the contact tracing. We need to obviously provide whatever tools we need to provide for them to do that. That is our obligation. I think us not doing that is putting us at a risk. But beyond that, they need to decide that if someone falls under the category of what is contact tracing, they determine that person needs to stay home or not be at school, not us. That's all I'm saying.
I think what he's saying, just to clarify, in the example I gave, that you turn Chad Howe's name in, that he's been in close contact, but he's going to continue to go to school until the Tennessee Department of Health contacts him and said, you're quarantined, don't go to school anymore. I think what David's saying, he wants the Tennessee Department of Health to be the ones to say, you're quarantined, you don't go to school, not us.
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing all of this revolving around is there's going to be a lag time. We're trying to take that out by putting it in this letter to go ahead and stay home so that we're out of that lag time. Because, yeah, if we turn it over to the Department of Health, it may be 2 days before they get contacted. That's what this is addressing. Not necessarily us making the diagnosis, but us making the stopgap until the diagnosis by the Tennessee Department of Health can be made. Am I understanding everybody's point on that?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Hickman.
I think that Mr. Lindsay did raise a good question that I think it does need to go to Jake, because he asked about the liability of it, and I think I'd like to hear his response.
So the question is, are we incurring more liability potentially by allowing kids to go home that have been identified as potential exposure, not sending them home for that up to 48-hour lag before the health department? Yes, I mean, there's more potential exposure there. If we were going to err on the side of caution, you send them home. If that's not what the board wants to do, is it a huge amount of liability? I can't tell you. I mean, obviously, if the kid later turns out to be positive and we've allowed them to stay in the school system for 48 hours and potentially infect other kids, there's an argument there that we've contributed to somebody else's exposure. So, sure, there's more liability if we go that direction. Is it a huge amount? I just can't tell you. I mean, we haven't seen any cases start to filter through about whether or not people can prove to the legal standard where they were exposed or not exposed. I just can't say, but I know there's more exposure, I just can't tell you how much.
Just to clarify too, this is not something the board would vote on or do. This is part of y'all's purview, am I correct?
We could do it either way. We can change it.
I mean, I do appreciate you taking input from the board, but at the end of the day, we're not gonna vote on what the letter
Okay.
says or doesn't say.
Yeah, we can, hearing the will of the board, on something that has potential liability is always something I'm gonna ask your will first, because, I don't want it to come back and you feel like we didn't assess the temperature of where you are at before something could happen.
Okay. Ms. Kinzer?
I just think you need to err on the side of caution. To just say we wouldn't send them home 48 hours, they're still at school, and you're right. Nobody wanted to be in this situation. We don't like being in this situation. Yes, we need to educate children, but we need to take care of them too. And, I think the way you're doing it is probably the way we have to do it. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Moore, but I think the idea of them having to stay at school for just 48 hours, waiting for that determination, when maybe it would be much safer for them to be away from school.
Thank you. Ms. Irvin?
I just have a question, if you can help me understand, Mr. Pointer, what is the process, and like I'm trying to understand, like when people, like my friend, why did it take so long? Were we waiting to hear from the individual that actually had COVID? Is that what caused the delay, or was it,
Yeah, the delay in that case wasn't on the Tennessee Department of Health, because they weren't on fall break. That delay time was on our side of it, and getting the information and getting it to them, getting the students who were identified and getting it sent up.
Okay.
So we've talked in our COVID response team as we approach Thanksgiving break and Christmas break, making sure that people are accessible and readily available so we can get that communication in a more timely manner.
So may I ask, on a normal, let's say, heaven forbid, tomorrow, I found out I had COVID, and I called you, like immediately. What's the normal turnaround time before we're letting our contact trace people know? Is it instantaneously, like same day?
No.
Or is it a couple of day delay?
So in the case of, if, just say you're a student, we'll pull seating charts. They'll do based on the parameters that are given, the 6-foot radius of where that student was sitting at, they gotta verify if those kids in the 6-foot radius were actually in class or not. So there's a process that takes place, and it also depends on the timing of the day. So then once all that information is gathered, it's verified and discussed between the nurse and the administrator. Sometimes teachers will get involved, and then they begin to, once those individuals are identified, then they either start going on the spreadsheet or they're contacted immediately. They may reach out to central office and say, hey, may I proceed with contacting these parents to notify them of that? And then they send the spreadsheet later, and then we send it to the Tennessee Department of Health. It's just based on the timing of the day and when it happens. If the later in the day that it happens, obviously, the later a parent will be contacted, maybe, that evening, late at dinner time sometimes when they're contacted as well.
So, and again, like I say, I think like an educator, but I worry about the health, and especially a lot of our staff that's older, and anybody can be impacted. But David, help me understand, because you know how I feel about this personally, but if the goal is just to turn it over to the health department and they're still going to quarantine our kids, are we just potentially removing our liability? Is that kind of the goal at it? And maybe that's more of a question for you guys, but I'm trying to get, because if it's going to be the same end result, then I might just do it,
So yes, my intention is that, contrary to, I guess, a little opposite of where Jake's at on this, I feel like we are taking on additional risk by making some determinations that we don't have to make. That's where I'm at, and I understand that. There's risk in both sides. I think he would agree with that. That's just my thing. I think if we don't have to be doing something, I want to get out of it, and let the people that are supposed to be doing it do it. And again, in no way should that be construed that I don't want us to go against what they say. We absolutely should be following that to T. And like I said, I think there should be some more communication from the Department of Health back to us on who they've chosen, because we may have missed somebody in our initial that they end up through their work. Because again, my issue all along has been that they have a process for contact tracing, which is not exactly like ours. I would assume that they have some other questions, and they actually have the scope to reach a little further and dig a little deeper. I just want to make sure that we're aligned on that, because my concern all along has been, and again, not that I'm aware of any cases that we could be brought under a suit that claims that we have kept someone from getting an education that should have been. So again, there's risks on that for me. And again, we're an education entity. That should be our main focus, rather than trying to do the job of the Department of Health.
And I can say this, that, no one enjoys this process of it at all. It's like nothing about it is fun, getting a call at 10 o'clock at night saying, sorry to bother you. But I do have some reserve in turning this solely over to a third party who is not fully in our schools, who could potentially start picking kids who are not necessarily there. So if they talk to little Johnny, and little Johnny says, well, yeah, I was beside Eric, and yeah, it was 15 minutes for 6 feet or less, and it was only really 2 minutes. Or they start picking kids that they were walking down the hallway with. We kind of have it down to a science, in a sense, where we're only using situations where kids are stationary. We're not catching kids in hallways or catching kids at PE or when kids are moving. And if we turn all of that over and we allow it to the determination to be left up to a student and or a parent for memory, then a lot of other things can start happening. I can say when we did even get the health department involved, there was a lot of kind of hesitation from principals and nurses, because we kind of had this thing down packed, and we were able to determine based on our kind of scope, like, hey, you come back at this time, we know when you're coming back, it's not deviated from, and those things. But I would just kind of err on the fact that if we turn this all the way over, we do relinquish a lot of our control, and then we really don't really know what's happening. And
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Parker, you got the last word on this.
So what you said, Mr. Porter, it sounds like in school by keeping the process internal before we shift it over to the health department, potentially. Or at least that was part of your...
Potentially we could. I mean, it's hard to say, but we're able to mitigate a lot of errors or just going off a student's memory or parent's memory and just kind of leaving it up to them. When we do at least stay involved, we can kind of control our decision-making and kind of work through it. So, for example, at one school, I'll never forget, principal called and was like, we got to shut down the whole school. There's just no way, I can't open up, we got to close the entire school. And when we start drilling down and asking questions, we said, no, go back, ask more questions. I don't think that we're at that point. And what went from shutting down the entire school potentially went to, 25 kids going home. And if the Tennessee Department of Health follows their own guidelines, we're talking about in situations when we have, like right now, we're called a red county right now. We're at a high rate of exposure. And at that level, based on the guidelines from the Tennessee Department of Health, when you have 2 cases in a school, you're supposed to shut down, right? And so now, by kind of taking more of an ownership, we're now able to determine when that is or how that is and make decisions based on staffing. Can we staff the building properly? Is the spread as bad as we really think it is? Can we connect the dots? And we're able to say and determine all of that and then turn it over to the Tennessee Department of Health. So that's,
Okay.
to kind of add to that.
Thank you very much. Do you, go
I
ahead.
got 2 more questions kind of related off that. One being, it also said in our reopening plan that we would have, Sorry, I'm short, I couldn't see over that. It also says that when we get to a certain number of active cases, we're going to pivot to remote or whatnot. Have we looked at that, revising that? Because I know that in the middle of this process, it changed how we determined active cases. And so is that still the same measurement that we want to use going forward, or are we giving people kind of a false sense of security as we get into flu and potentially COVID season?
Mr. Hickman and Mr. Gaines can follow up, but I think it had to do with having to change the CLP altogether possibly. And so to avoid changing the CLP, we left the statistics and the data and the measurements as is the same, even with the government making the changes that they did.
Can I just be brutally honest about it? Is, you know, as we've told you before, we have already disregarded some of the recommendations, and I think we're all aware of some of them we have. And right now, when we pivot a school, the biggest factor that comes up is we just can't staff it. It just comes to a point where we can't staff it. We try everything we can to keep that school open until we just can no longer staff it. The only other option that we've had to use is when we started seeing increased cases daily, and they just started surmounting, and we thought at that time we have to back up, get that school cleaned out, have a period of where we can just try to get that infection rate out of that school. So those are really the two standards, quite frankly, that we use. Is that particular school, it was 14 students within a week that were positive, and there were not connected students. In other words, it wasn't somebody you were in class with, and it was the outbreak there. It was different areas they were coming out, and that's what we look at. If we see like a cheerleading team, and they're all positive, we know that's all one source. Just because it was 10 cheerleaders, we're not going to close that school down because we think that was a contained source. But if we have one from this class, freshman, 2 or 3 from, and just unconnected, that's when we start looking at having to close the school down. And then, because we want to keep these schools open. We want these kids to be at school. And I want to go on record, we're trying everything we can to keep these kids at school. But we also have to keep a measure of doing what we think is best for the health sense of our kids too. And when we feel like there is a chance that a child can be in that zone of contracting COVID, we want to be aggressive and make sure that they have their quarantine as well.
Thank you. Your last question?
My last question is with regards to the education. I know that there was some discussion about remote videos and the teachers. I think we had assigned teachers doing remote videos, and now we've transitioned a different way. Where do we stand on that? Because I have real concerns about what the education looks like for what people had kind of gotten used to and the technology that we actually have available. My understanding is, you know, we don't have devices in every classroom so that a teacher can just turn on their device and tape it. So then there's privacy concerns if they call out little Johnny in the middle of class. But at the same time, they don't necessarily have an extra planning period to just tape their lessons for the entire day. So I'm kind of unclear why we went away from having teachers that did not have students in their class prepare videos.
It was because we had about 1,000 kids that came back, and where schools were no longer able to say we have a position, we can do that anymore, because it was going to make their classrooms over that limit of what they're supposed to have. That happened at almost all the schools where we had so many come back they couldn't dedicate that. But we are aware of this as a problem. We also have a solution that Dr. Beverly Miller is going to start trying to apply, because we understand that teachers now don't have that extra time to do the videos. So
you're telling me that, like, at each school they don't necessarily have a dedicated remote teacher, but there's not one person that teaches second grade that is remote right now? I'm just
You're saying one teacher through the district or through
one
the school?
teacher in the district? Because what we promised in our reopening plan
Right.
is that they're going to have an MCPS teacher, not that they're going to have a Baker or a
Correct.
Woodard teacher.
So what our solution is there are certain grades we don't have anybody on remote anymore. But our solution is since we're going back to the sub, since we have such a budget that we haven't really used a lot in the subs, is we're going to try really hard to find those subs that do come to school and make those priority, and we're gonna try to get some master teachers sub days where they can start producing videos as a team to be given out to those grade levels to use. Also, Tennessee has, the Department of Education has also came out with some videos now that we're sharing out that they can use that are aligned to the standards. And it's not the best solution, but when we don't have any growth positions in our budget, we can't just produce a teacher and say that teacher is now gonna be doing these videos, because we just don't have the capacity to pull a teacher out without making numbers go over. And then
I understand the problem, but my focus is more so on the kids' education.
Correct.
And where the kids are actually getting educated now. And if we're just essentially not providing the instruction that we promised them we were going to provide them in the beginning. You know, I've said all along, the K-4 does not have devices. They have a packet. A kindergartner cannot read right now. I'm just going to go on a limb and say that for the majority of our kindergartners, they're not reading. So how can they do their packet if they have no instructional videos to go by? I mean, I was a remote parent for 2 weeks, so I know how beneficial those videos could potentially be. And actually, I will commend the teachers that were doing them. I thought they were doing a fabulous job. I just hate to see that we just, like, in the middle, just kind of flip-flopped back to something that I really just don't think is providing an educational outcome that we really want. And I would actually say curriculum and instruction, like, if you gotta pull somebody from curriculum and instruction and put them in a room to like, but they need to be developing lessons, and I'm not saying for, like, the next week, but probably for, like, the next month, because this isn't going to go away. I mean, we should be planning that far in advance and producing videos that far in advance based on where we currently are and what we know we're going to be facing.
And we are trying to work through all, for certain grade levels, there are, when people produce those videos, we are trying to work to, our staff is still sharing those videos and still producing them and still producing those to go with the packets. We are, as Mr. Hickman said, as schools are getting smaller with the number of remote students, it is more difficult to assign a teacher at a school to say, or for a principal to assign a teacher to say, you have the remote students, because they have just as many in-person students. When we had the opportunity for a teacher to be remote, that teacher was doing that, and we were, in a sense, copying that teacher's, if that teacher made that video was being used in other places. That number is getting less now. So we are trying to look at other solutions, because we do realize that now some teachers, we don't have, like a teacher may have, I have 15 students, but there are 5 remotes. And we don't have that opportunity where we can balance it out to where one teacher can take all the remotes.
But I go back to, are you essentially saying that there's 5 second grade teachers, five remote students in second grade? Like, without seeing the numbers per grade, it's really hard, because I don't think that's the case. And on top of that, teachers are certified to teach K through 6 or what, I mean, you know, if they have a school, if the school itself has 30 and they end up having to produce videos for the 30 remote students at a school, and they're certified to teach first, second, and third, I mean, it may be asking a lot, but at the same time, they're not in a classroom with a student, and they don't have the same issues that teachers that are teaching with students have as far as privacy concerns and just planning ability.
And we are trying to work with schools where they have those situations, where they have a smaller amount of students. Maybe a teacher is saying, I'm taking K through 2 students and doing that. But that, like you said, depends on the number. And we are working through principals to allow them to look at where their remote numbers are, and they're coming up with the best plan to serve those students. We're still assisting with trying to produce videos as they're being produced, but it's, you know, it was an impact on, if one teacher has a remote, has enough for a remote class, we're trying to rely on that teacher to make the remote videos for the whole, say, second grade across the district. That's no longer tenable. We have to kind of focus it on the schools, and that's what we're trying to do. And where there are situations where there are logistical issues, that's where we're trying to look at other funds to try to supplement teachers or try to work that out so that we can still be able to produce those videos. Our packets being made every week and videos being produced, we are still we're still assisting at that at our office every week. We're still producing those packets. Other schools have said they are able to logistically do that easier.
Okay, I think we've about reached the end of this, and we're gonna have to move on. Is it a yes or no question?
It's he can bring it back later.
Bring it back later question. That's all I want
Can
from
you
here
get
on
me,
out.
I meant to send you an email. Can you get me the number of students who came back from remote learning after fall break?
It was in the, I believe it was in
Okay,
the-
just
the memo.
send it through the board, please. Yes, Ms. Irvin, quickly.
Just real quick, whenever I worked here, I believe everything that's created by everybody, it's actually, it belongs to the school, not the individual, if it's done. So what I would like to see happen, we got really talented teachers putting these resources in. I hope that there's a way that we're collaborating to keep those in effect for future years, so if something like this happens, we've got them and they're ready to roll out.
And all of our class videos are shared on diploma.cool.
Okay.
All of our instructional videos for the weeks are shared on that website.
Thank you, and I am gonna take just a moment for next work session. I would like us to start looking at what milestones we can put in place for parents to start coming back into the schools. We're not gonna tackle that tonight, but I do want to address that in a future work session. All right, do we want to have the streaming options for board meetings discussed tonight, or?
30 seconds.
If you can do it in 30 seconds,
All
you
right.
can do it.
So I sent an email regarding this. I had talked with Tommy about this. I know the original question was, can we do some streaming options? In our discussions, it became pretty clear that it's kind of a bigger question. What I would ask is if we can bring this back to the work session in November, because we need to talk about roles of employees and what that regards. If we change voting, how that impacts some other things. Anyway, it's a bigger discussion. I would like to have it in November.
It's gonna be on the work session in November. Number 10, 27 seconds. ASUS service agreement.
This is just basically a contract that was deemed by the finance department that we needed to bring it to you. This lets us work on equipment and get reimbursed instead of waiting on a tech or having to ship it off. That's all it is.
Consent, that's going on consent. Other business, instructional low bid purchases, portable electronic devices. Is that good for consent for all of these? Any comments that we need to know? All right. Any other information for the good of the board? We will convene again November 3rd here at 6 o'clock. We are done. Thank y'all for your patience and for hanging with us for the time.